Okay, let's jump in. Hello again, and welcome to the Small Cats Symposium 2026. My name is Angus Morton, and I've been asked to give you a quick crash course on Zoom webinars to help maximize your experience with us online. I'd just like to highlight a few of the main features quickly, but please be reminded there are several Africa Massive virtual hosts within the meeting. So if at any point you have any questions or concerns, you can just pop us a direct chat or to chat to the host and the panelists. Or you can send us an email, smallcats@africamassive.co.za. So just to quickly run over a few, you'll see in your toolbars at the bottom of your Zoom meeting, you have Q&A, pretty self-explanatory, but basically by clicking on that window, you'll be able to type in any question at any time throughout the symposium. And please note, this is very important, when we get to Q&A sessions, you won't be acknowledged and your question won't be addressed if you have not typed it in there, in that box. The moderator will still ask you to unmute and verbally ask your question to the speaker or the panelists, but please do type your questions in there. Second to that, we obviously have the chat feature, also pretty self-explanatory, just to catch up, to network, have a bit of chit-chat. But the most important thing here is please do not ask questions directed at any of the speakers or panelists in the chat. Please use the Q&A feature. Lastly, and something that's very cool, is our captions. You are able to listen to the presentations in various other languages using AI-generated translations. So you can just click on that captions button, show your captions, and choose your preferred language. And then just a quick mention is views. You are able to change your view settings. So it's normally in the top right of your Zoom window. Just click on view and you have some other options to look at. Lastly, I'd just like to message to all our speakers, panelists, and moderators, please do try join the meeting at least 20 minutes before your session scheduled start time. You will be promoted by our virtual hosts to what Zoom calls a panelist, and this basically just gives you this presenting functionality where you can unmute, start video, share screen, etc. Please do, once you have been promoted, please remain muted with your camera off and don't try share screen until the moderator has introduced you and it is your time to present, just to avoid any interruptions. And finally, please, when joining the meeting, please ensure your profile name is your full name. It just helps us all recognize who we're speaking to, and for the host, if they do need to reach out to any of the presenters or moderators, then we know how to find you. Okay, and without further ado, I think we can kick off. Dr. Axel Murenschlager is Panthera's Director of the Small Cats Program and Conservation Translocations to escalate global recovery of wild cat species, ecosystem conservation, and livelihood benefits for local communities. He is also chair of the IUCN SSC Conservation Translocation Specialist Group. Axel is an adjunct professor at Canada's University of Calgary, adjunct associate professor at Clemson University in the United States, and research associate at Oxford University, where he received his PhD. He also serves on boards, advisory committees, and funding bodies in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Kenya. Axel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Angus, and indeed, thank you to everyone online. This is so exciting to have all of you with us for the first virtual Small Cat Symposium. I'm speaking to you from Calgary in Western Canada, and here it is our custom to first acknowledge the Indigenous First Nations, who are the original stewards of this land. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, I honor and acknowledge Moqanaki and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Teka Nakota Nations, Chiniki, Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Tsuut'ina Nation. I also acknowledge that this territory is home to the Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation. And with this, I have the privilege of speaking to you now about connecting globally to escalate science and action for small cats. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors here, Jolene Broadfield, Richard Robbins, and Wai-Ming Wong, all of whom will be involved in helping to run sessions and helping in the background over the next days to come. Now, speaking again of my backyard, Here we have something that is in my backyard, literally on my back fence, even in the front, front yard, the bobcat, a species of small cat that is actually adapted quite well to people and is starting to spread around its range. However, as we all know, small cats are not all created equal, and such as the margay in Central and South America, here's a species that's starting to come under threat. First of all, a marvelous species hunting at night in the treetops, being able to even descend down a tree head first because it's able to spin its paw around, a truly remarkable species, but coming under threat more and more, for instance, through deforestation. And then even if we skip further ahead, beware now of the greatest killer of all, we have the black-footed cat in South Africa. And here we have this little killer who's actually successful in about 60% of its hunts. But despite that ability, it still falls prey to other species and also contends with unique threats, such as a disease that actually causes its kidneys to shut down and can be lethal. And so we need to think about cats in a very specific sense. Even as we go on to look at the manual, for instance, in Asia, it is about their needs, of course, about what is unique to them and what they need. But in a broader picture, as we think about it, I think it begs questions of us if these species are struggling. What is the world that we want to live in? What is, basically the state of the species, and what does it mean about us? These species, just as we do, have a right to exist. And on the one hand, that is useful for the species, but also for the broader ecosystem ranging from, for instance, the deserts of Morocco to the very lush Pantanal in Brazil. Now, we know that ecosystems that are biodiverse are good for people too, providing fresh water, fresh air, food. And so there's a utilitarian reason for us to help small cats. But I think the connections around the world go even deeper than that. Small cats mean more than the physical or practical ecosystem and human benefits. They are a deep part of cultures and of spirituality. And so really, the eyes are on us, as a community here around the world, us to come up with solutions to help these species where needed most. And one of the things that we thought in Panthera is there are many people out there, there are more people out there than we probably even know, that are united in this cause to help small cats. But how do we bring them together? Well, that was the inspiration for a symposium to bring people together, to unify, to unite. And this symposium has truly grown in terms of its scope from our original, even dreams, and has only been made possible by amazing people, such as our Small Cat Symposium Committee. So I'd like to acknowledge my dear friend, Dr. Wang, Director of Small Cat Conservation Science at Panthera, Dr. Constanza Napolitano, Associate Professor at the University of Chile, Professor Colleen Downs, University Fellow at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and Dr. Shamita Mukherjee, Senior Principal Scientist at the South India Center of the Wildlife Institute of India. And also, although she says she's behind the scenes, Jolene Broadfield, who's been a true force in making this entire symposium possible. Now, I am so privileged and feel really honored by the plenary and keynote speakers that we have lined up for you. I think some of the leaders in the world that help us take stock of the current situation for small cats, but also facing forward can help us look at the road ahead. So Professor David Macdonald, who's a professor of wildlife conservation and the founding director of Wild Crew at Oxford University. Dr. Christine Breitenmoser-Würsten, who's the co-chair of the IUCN SSC Cat Specialist Group out of Switzerland, Medina Fitriana, who's an MSc candidate with Washington State University in the US, but also with Sintas in Indonesia. And then also with Professor Tadeo de Oliveira, professor of the Wildlife Conservation and Ecology Lab at the Maranhão State University in Brazil. Now, one of the things that struck us when we were seeing the abstracts coming in, of course, it was a very competitive process because of the tremendous number of abstracts submitted, is that we wanted to also think about overarching questions that aren't necessarily answered by the different talks that are being given. And so here we have 4 panels that will be coming up with truly experts from around the world. The first panel discussion will be how do we escalate global awareness to help small cat conservation? And for this, we will have Celina Chen from Overstories, Sean Murray, who's a freelance journalist, Sean Southey from the Canadian Wildlife Federation. Then a question many of you might ask at times is how should we engage governments to improve policies and actions that help small cats? And here we will have Urs Breitenmoser, co-chair of the Cat Specialist Group, Liz Bennett of the Wildlife Conservation Society, Ronaldo Morato of Panthera. A question many of us ask, or many of you might ask, is what do funders look for? And so we're privileged to have Joe Cook from the Rufford Foundation, Wai-Ming Wong from Panthera, Nicholas Hurd from Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. And then in terms of the fourth panel, as we look at recovery, let's look at going from detections to density and rethinking how we measure small cat recovery. And for this, we will have Byron Weckworth from the Mountain Lion Foundation, Sarah Williams from Panthera, and Andrew Hearn from Wild Crew in Oxford. But enough about us. How about you? You all out there. I've been just amazed at the kinds of numbers and distribution of projects, of panelists, of co-authors coming in. So hang on here. I'm so happy to show you this. Not only will we have presentations looking at global views, global methodologies, global innovations, but also presentations working or showing projects from 27 countries. This, of course, requires collaboration. And so if we look at co-authors, we see that actually the co-authors are from 32 countries. Truly amazing. And then, as I kept peeking at the numbers and asking my colleagues, I am just amazed about where you are all coming from. I was once told nobody cares about small cats, or there's just a handful of organizations. Well, check this out. Not only are there those that will be presenting, but we have registrants from 63 countries. I think we have a pretty good, distribution here across the world. This is you. And just think about this now in terms of being able to connect with others through the forum, through the emails and such, through this symposium. 29 species, and the names here being out of your abstracts, will be talked about. Really, again, an amazing distribution. And as we think about these species, and we think about it within Panthera too, we reflect on our mission. And Panthera advances our mission of ensuring a future for all 40 species of wildcats and the vast landscapes on which they depend and for which they play a vital role. So we wish to fulfill our ultimate vision of a world where wildcats thrive in healthy, natural, and developed landscapes that sustain people and biodiversity. And so I don't just talk about applied science, but action-based science, and ask questions. Which species or populations are in trouble and need help? What do we need to understand to guide conservation interventions most effectively? Who is expected to take action on evidence-based conservation recommendations? Often we produce science, make recommendations, but who will actually make the changes in policy or practice? And how do we determine the impact and scalability of our conservation interventions? Well, in approaching this, we think about how to best battle many threats. These are just some examples, such as roads, habitat loss, disease, poaching, or illegal trade. And our view within Panthera is we focus first on those species that need help most, specifically those in the red boxes, which are those that are either threatened within the IUCN Red List categories or near threatened. And it's a tremendous number. When you think about it, first of all, over 80% of wildcats are small cats, and over 2/3 of all wildcats that are threatened with extinction are small cats. So we need to make a difference. But maybe these species are actually doing well. at least in the terms of their trend, we ask that question. Well, the Iberian lynx is doing better, but otherwise you see red arrows next to red boxes, showing that virtually all threatened species and near threatened species are on the decline. So we need to unite, work together, and do better. And let's remember that recovery is possible. For instance, the amazing efforts for Scottish wildcat have been involved in for some time in Scotland and now coming into England as well. And then the iconic return of the Spanish tiger, the Iberian lynx, the most tremendous success story for wildcats, having gone from critically endangered to now vulnerable through reintroductions. Amazing. Now, on the one hand, we like to empower others through Panthera Small Cat Action Fund. So, established in 2008, the Small Cat Action Fund supports conservation action and science focused on the world's small cats, with priority given to threatened and near-threatened species. And since its inception, the Small Cat Action Fund has granted over $1 million in small cat conservation initiatives, supported over 180 small cat conservationists and early career biologists worldwide, advanced conservation efforts for over 25 small cat species, strengthened local capacity in key small cat range countries, and catalyze long-term conservation programs through seed funding. So we're proud to be able to help a little bit, but at the same time, our true potential and capability comes from our work with partners on the ground. This being sort of a snapshot of different areas where we are in the world working with partners. Some areas are more pilot sites, some are very strong and mature, having gone for over 10 years already. And so, it's our attempt to try and help as much as we can. Our focus, again, is primarily on those threatened and near threatened IUCN red-listed species. And our approach really is about trying to understand. So we take action, for instance, for the fishing cat in Thailand, where our teams are working very closely with communities on the ground to understand the mortality factors that affect these species. Working, with scientists and with rangers, doing, the good science that we do with both collaring, tracking, understanding habitat use, camera traps for distribution, and really it's ultimately only to get information that is useful. Here we have, for instance, counter poaching operations or just removing threats, but we are working with people, for instance, securing chicken coops so that they, the local people don't lose their precious chickens to fishing cats, and that there isn't retaliation on the fishing cats themselves. And also working with the fishermen to make sure that their livelihood is guaranteed at the same time as that of the fishing cats. So there can be very practical solutions, for instance, just removing the nets that are sometimes discarded in the communities. But then there are also overarching threats, such as are being faced now in terms of land use changes. And so we need to go from the ground onto policy and onto national action planning as well. So we are looking, for more partners in a strategic sense. And the question is, where can we best work with you for science-based action, either by joining you or you joining us at our sites? And these are our criteria internally. We look for baseline knowledge. What is the quality of existing baseline threat or population data from Panthera and or other organizations? What is the likelihood of political stability and safety for our staff and that of partners? What is the likelihood we can make interventions on known or potential threats? What is the evidence potential? So what is the likelihood we could conduct biological or social surveys to demonstrate whether the interventions have been effective? And what is the potential to partner with organizations on the ground to implement science and action activities? Financially, how can we share cost among organizations and create efficiency? And in terms of funding, what is the likelihood that the considered sites would meet grant or sponsorship or philanthropic interests pursued by Panthera and in collaboration with partners? And so really, it's all about people. For instance, we have Raíssa Sepulveda, who's our amazing scientist working in Brazil, coming from ocelot projects to now working on multiple threatened species in different areas of the country. We have Maureen Drewley and Robin Horan here in Nigeria just a couple of months ago, together with Bello Adamu on the far right. And here we see them in terms of training programs, in terms of field work with the Africa Nature Investors field teams. And they're looking for the right synergy of conservation between leopards and African golden cats. In the Andes, our teams are working with the Andean Cat Alliance, not just with the cats, but with the local communities, trying to return value and economic benefit, for instance, through bringing handicrafts to markets in Western societies. And here our Panthera Malaysia team is together with the Rainforest Discovery Center in a community conservation area. And they're learning from the Discovery Center at the same time as being able to provide benefit as well. And here we have Prasanna Kablang, who heads up our Thailand Panthera team. An official announcement was made on National Wildlife Conservation Day by the Director General of Thailand's Department of National Parks. And this was to celebrate our team's first discovery of the flat-headed cat in the country in over 30 years. What this means is it isn't just about the biology. It's about education. It's about outreach. It's about collaboration. It's about working together with governments, with other stakeholders. And so that brings us to this day. We collectively around the world have a lot to do. A lot has been done, and we will be hearing about it over the next 4 days. If you really think about it, we are a community, even as you come from 63 countries. I bet that because of the passion, the knowledge, and the desire you have for conservation, you might have more in common with someone right on the other side of the world that is in this symposium than your next door neighbor at home. And so you are united, and we should step up together. Let's think not just strategically about how we do science and actions, but how we support each other in times of challenge, in times of need, to bolster. Conservation is a tough game, but it is so worth it because the cats out there need us, and we know we can make a difference. Thank you. If you did have a question, you can throw one in the question and answer, but otherwise, if everything's clear, we're happy to move on as well. There's a comment about, there's a question. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, Miriam Weston, would you mind unmuting? And Angus, if you could allow Miriam to ask her question.
I'm Miriam Weston from Mexico, and I lead the Ocelot working group. So we have several partners in Mexico and in Salvador, so more than 20 partners. And a few of them have raised inquiries about how we could potentially receive training on camera trapping and like more technical aspects of monitoring. And I was looking at your presentation, and there's like there was a mention of capacity building. So I was wondering if there might be a chance for collaboration, and what will be the process for that? Because most of the species that we work on are basically least concern.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. Very good question. And thank you also for your leadership in Mexico and across the region, for species like ocelots that need our help. I mean, the techniques, of course, are in many ways the same, no matter how threatened a species is. For instance, as you mentioned, camera trapping. And just like I was mentioning for the efforts in Nigeria, when we do training, it can be applicable to many species. So we would be, most open to learning more about the needs that you have. And in fact, if in a global sense, we can really get a better feeling for what the needs are out there, then we can escalate or create greater programs. I mean, on the one hand, for capacity building, we do so already by empowering through funding and such different types of leaders around the world. But on the other hand, if it's more technical, such as the work that I was referring to, that Maureen is leading in West Africa, then please do reach out. So you again, we'll have connecting emails and such. I'd like to learn more our Panthera team would like to learn more, and then others on the call also might be interested to engage with you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much.
Yeah, sure. I'll follow up by email. And thank you for the space and for everything you do.
Amazing, so much. So thanks so much. All right. Well, with this, I think we'll move on to our next speaker, and it's truly a privilege to introduce John Ayres. Now, John Ayres was the chairman and CEO of IDEX Laboratories from 2002 through to 2019. And John led a global team of over 8,000 employees dedicated to enhancing the health and well-being of pets. During John's tenure, the company grew annual revenues from 380 million to 2.4 billion, while the company's share price enjoyed a more than 40-fold increase. I wish I would have invested in that at the time, John. John has a degree from Yale in molecular biophysics and biochemistry and an MBA from Harvard Business School, where he graduated with high distinction. John and his wife, Helene, have established the Ayres Wildcat Conservation Trust, dedicated to the conservation of Felidae in the wild. And indeed, this is what has made this symposium possible. Accelerating his dedication to the future of wildcats around the world, Ayres and the Ayres Wildcat Conservation Trust joined Panthera's Global Alliance for Wildcats in March of 2021 with a commitment to invest at least 20 million US over the next 10 years for wildcat conservation. This pledge supports a range of critical and strategic wildcat conservation measures with a particular focus, I'm happy to say, on the preservation of the world's 33 small wildcat species. Now, in September of 2021, John also assumed the position of chair of the board of directors. Aside from all these accolades, I can just personally say that, to me, John is a visionary, an inspiration, and a mentor. And I'm so pleased to welcome you here, John.
Thanks, Axel, for that wonderful introduction. I assume everybody can hear me?
Yes, perfect, John.
Yeah, okay, great. So good morning, or should I say good afternoon, good evening, good late night, whatever. It's great to be here on this symposium. You know, Axel, when you first estimated that 80 people might register, I thought that was about right. I understand we have more than 360, one for every day of the year. I think that tells you something about how important this global community is and how big it is. People often ask me how I became so passionate about wildcat conservation. They expect some dramatic story, some amazing mentor, but the truth is simpler. When I was a boy visiting the zoo, I'd glance at the lions and tigers, but I really wanted to see the small cats. The ocelots, the fishing cats, Manuel. I couldn't quite explain why. There was something about them, the sense that you were looking at a smallish yet highly intelligent creature that had perfected something over millions of years of evolution. That fascination never left me. About 10 years ago, and I think I was inspired by God in this, I just asked a simple question. I love nature and I love cats. I wonder what kind of cats are in nature. I searched for and I found a book called Wild Cats of the World, written by Luke Hunter. Each night before bed, I'd study one chapter, one species. I'd look at the photographs, the drawings, the range maps, and think about how that particular cat had adapted to its particular corner of the world. The book started with small cats and ended with the 7 big cats. It took me a long time just to get through the small cats, and I really didn't even get to the big cats until much later. And what I discovered in these pages focused my philanthropy. 33 purported species, but I think perhaps even more as research and insight continues to evolve. The diversity is staggering. Some live on mountaintops at 3,000 plus meters. Others hunt in tropical mangrove swamps. Some are built for the pampa and savanna. Others for clouded forests up high and so dense that sunlight barely reaches the ground. The Andean cat, the pampas cat and serval, the northern oncilla. And then there is, as you mentioned, Axel, the black-footed cat, the smallest cat in Africa and among the most lethal hunters on the planet. One genus, Leopardus, reduced its chromosome pairs to 18 when the rest of the Felidae have 19 pairs. And yet they all are unmistakably feline, all designed by evolution to be supremely efficient predators and hunters with senses that put ours to shame. The domestic cat, as a representative example, can hear up to 83,000 hertz, double the dog and quadruple us human. The sand cat, I love that picture you showed. Did you see those ears? The sand cat can hear prey nearly a kilometer away across open desert. I still think about the wonderful paper on ocelot latrines, community building boards, essentially, bulletin boards, essentially, where an ocelot can distinguish other ocelots and by how closely related they are just from the scent of their urine. These animals are the masterworks of nature. I noticed that Luke Hunter worked for Panthera at the time when he authored the book. I looked into Panthera and found it was dedicated exclusively to wildcat conservation. And that's exactly what I wanted to support. But I also noticed their small cat program was very modest, a few grants annually. My first contribution to Panthera was $150, and I said, this is for the small cats. Working with Ming and then adding Axel, we built the program to where it stands today. When we started, total global investment in small cat conservation by Panthera and everybody else was estimated to be roughly $300,000 a year. Today, it's over 10 times that and growing. I'm proud to have been a catalyst for that growth, but I want to be clear. The reason we are here today is because of you, your advocacy, your research, your field work in places that are difficult and sometimes dangerous. I also want to acknowledge Jim Sanderson, whom I support financially since 2021 and who has spent decades championing small wildcats when very few others were paying attention. His trust-based approach to conservation funding has supported and I suspect mentored many of you on this webinar. We're deeply grateful for his uncompromising commitment. This symposium is the largest gathering of small cat practitioners in history by a large margin and happening virtually. As a result, we're able to have researchers from Bangladesh, Borneo, Colombian Andes, Turkmenistan, Namibia, people who might never have been able to attend a conference in person. Axel made this symposium purposely inclusive, global, and multi-generation. As Axel says, all of our planning, all of our funding, all of our science really matters when the cats feel the results of the actions we take in the wild. We do it for the cats. I say to all of you online today, your work is noticed by me, but especially by the cats. You are having impact, and we're just getting started. Thanks.
Thank you, John. That's so inspiring, of course, and thank you for making it possible all around the world, empowering people, helping cats, restoring ecosystems, providing benefit to all that treasure cats and the ecosystems they depend upon. It's really remarkable. Thank you. With that, now I will actually transition to our first or our only plenary presentation from Professor David Macdonald. And David Macdonald, well, before I give his big introduction here, I'm so pleased because he is my PhD supervisor and long-term friend. Now the more formal introduction. David Macdonald, CBE, is Professor of Wildlife Conservation and the founding director of Wild Crew in Oxford. His fellowship, held at Oxford University's Lady Margaret Hall since 1986, was the first in any university dedicated to research in biological conservation. David is one of the most prominent international figures in raising public awareness of the importance of biodiversity through his films and books. He is well known for his work on cats, including lions, tigers, leopards, and especially clouded leopards, although his research has spanned published studies on moths to penguins. Within the Wild Crew, his team have built bridges with some of the most remote communities in Africa, Asia, and South America, and have formed conservation partnerships which benefit both the people and the wildlife with which they coexist. David has supervised more than 160 successful Oxford doctoral students. It strikes me that I'm happy to represent 1/160th of this. And he created the Recanati Kaplan Center's postgraduate diploma in international wildlife conservation practice to train aspiring conservationists from less developed countries, for which he received the Queen's Award for Higher Education in 2011. David has a strong record of public service, having been on the board of almost every major UK conservation body: WWF, FFI, ZSL, WWT, RSP, RSPCA, the Wildlife Trusts, and chairman of Earthwatch. David has published approximately 2,000 peer-reviewed papers and book chapters. His research, in fact, has become increasingly interdisciplinary as the whole field of conservation has evolved. So more recently, his biological writings are enmeshed in issues of environmental policy, of economics, of ethics, and of research strategy. So it's such a pleasure, dear David, to welcome you here.
Axel, I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly, David.
Very good. Now, the really terrifying part of this whole thing is sharing my screen. If we can get over that, everything else will go smoothly.
Take your time. There's no rush, David.
Okay, share. Can you see anything at all?
Yeah, see the screen, and it might need to go into presenter mode, and there it is. It's looking absolutely marvelous. Thank you.
Okay, so now I've just got a little bit of extra work to do with my cursor, and I think we're good to go. Axel, you can see presenter mode. Is that right? At the moment?
That's seeing your cover slide with lovely cats and a great title. Thank you.
I think we're now ready to go. And that was truly the worrying part of the whole thing. Okay, off we go. The topic of this conference is, as you've just heard, small cats. But I think they've got another relevant attribute. They're not just small. Most of them are effectively invisible. It's therefore relevant that my story begins with some highly visible small cats, ones that I began studying in 1977. Okay, here's Tom and his adolescent son, Lucky. They were stars of my BBC documentary on farm cats and their sociology. It was entitled The Curious Cat. And I studied their social behavior. Here's adolescent Lucky expressing an opinion to his adult aunt. And I studied their food supply and documented the first case of alloparental care and communal nursing as these two adult sisters, themselves from different litters, indiscriminately nursed their shared litters. Later, I also documented infanticide by incoming males, confirming observations first recorded by Herodotus in 450 BCE. All this revealed highly structured sociology, such that while the flows of licking, you might say grooming, amongst the male and the older female F1 and her two adult daughters were broadly symmetrical between dyads of cats, the flow of head rubbing were highly asymmetrical and generally centripetal, by which I mean towards socially central individuals. Inspired by the revelations of this small group of cats, I graduated to larger colonies, such as the 40 or so cats fed by farmer Bert Parker from his milking parlour. Their spatial arrangements were mind-bogglingly complicated to monitor, necessitating the calculation of an index of association from each cat's point of view, expressing the number of times it was in proximity, X, to each other cat as a fraction of the times when they were both present, YAB, in the farmyard together. This revealed much social geometry. For example, mothers tended to be positioned closer to their sons and daughters than to their nephews and nieces, who were in turn closer than unrelated kittens. Or, another example, juvenile males tended to be closer to their male littermates than to their older or younger brothers. In big colonies, lineages split. On the death of her own mother, this female became suddenly much more aggressive towards two of her sisters, they were called 81 and 91, than to her adult daughters, 94 and 96. Factions leading to lineages that were either central or peripheral with respect to their presence in the farmyard, and with significant consequences for the survival of their kittens. Those of you already thinking about parallels with lion society will be interested to know that juvenile males were particularly strongly affiliated. But it was not to lions that farm cats led me, but rather to the wildcats of Scotland, which are a critically endangered subpopulation of the forest-adapted European wildcats. Its genes are shown in green on the map here, which is, as my student Carlos Driscoll led us in discovering, only a few genes away from the Near Eastern steppe-adapted, orange in the picture, Felis libica, the ancestor of the domestic cat. The orange libica mitochondrial DNA in the green Sylvestris genomes gets there through cross-breeding with domestic cats. The Near Eastern, Central Asian, and domestic cats all belong to the same, in this picture, orangey-coloured clade. My point is that if you want to get inside the skin of invisible wildcat species, I think a good place to start would be intimately observable domestic cats. So I turn to wildcats in Scotland in the quest for a blueprint for studying invisibly elusive felids. First, what was, or indeed is, a Scottish wildcat, much beloved of clan heraldry and the Scottish Tourist Board? This question has puzzled naturalists for 300 or so years, and is complicated by at least 1,500 years of cohabitation with domestic cats brought by the Romans. Hamilton even kindly provides drawings of both a wildcat and a mixed breed wildcat, although personally I struggle to see which differences he had in mind. Measurements of pelts and indeed guts and leg bones and skulls revealed two mutually distinguishable morphotypes, of which, let's call it group 1, is further from the domestic cat. Their skull 3D morphometries similarly segregate, with the group 2 cats closer to domestics and group 1 cats further from domestics. Well, loads more skulls confirmed similar categories in both Scottish and indeed South African wild living cats, and in their pelts. Orange in the colour code being closer to and red being further from domestics, which led to a point scoring system to diagnose Scottish wildcat pelage, latterly complemented by a genetic test and a parallel scoring system. All this added to an abundance of fieldwork in the Angus glens of Scotland led us to this dreary and predictable list of threats, and culminated in the first Wildcat Action Plan for Scotland. Since when the wider team, latterly under the banner Saving Wildcats, has focused on camera trapping, GPS tracking and genetics, work pioneered by Kerry Kilshaw, pictured here downloading GPS fixes, who compiled these fascinating shots illustrating wild and hybrid pelage. These studies provided us with 28 predictor variables to populate, led by our colleague Sam Cushman, a habitat use model for wildcat hybrids, which we validated with independent data sets to produce this final habitat suitability model for wildcats in Scotland. Finally, the Saving Wildcats team, led now by Helen Sen, has released captive-bred pure wildcats in these places. So we have the opportunity to compare the model developed from the wild living hybrids with the new GPS data from the released wildcats in the quest for further practical release sites. Happily, it looks like the released wildcats are indeed using the habitats we had predicted. This wildcat journey reminds me of a conservation research paradigm that we actually developed while working on the impact of invasive American mink on water voles. It looks a bit like this: progressing through diagnostic research to solution-based research and on to recovery management. For the wildcat in Scotland, I'd say so far we are about here. And this curve inspired my generalized research strategy pyramid, building from species ecology through landscape scale processes to a decision support tool with the arrowhead piercing into policy. To explore how this works, let us first choose a species. There's at least 3 dozen to choose from, of which, as it happens, I've been lucky to work on the 25 or so shown in bold. 2/3 are threatened. Later, my colleague, Emily Madsen, is going to present to you a review about knowledge gaps on the whole caboodle. These cats embrace the small Felid guild, the wildcat, marbled cat, margay, cola, and black-footed. So let's plot them relative to the overall slope for carnivoran predator-prey mass. Mostly the little cats are mousers, but not all. The fishing cat's front toes, as you know, are partially webbed, the tips of the claws protruding when sheathed, and it can swim underwater. The flat-headed cat may be even more pisciferous, having nearly parallel rows of pointed teeth. Other cats, however, are medium-sized. The ocelot, the Asian golden, the leopard cat, the African golden, and the, as Axel mentioned, bobcat. Okay, let's add them now. This leads us through the caracal and the links to the puma, leaping the divide to the magnificent 7 or so. They're all familiar faces to you. All comfortably above, this is critical, the 20 kilogram threshold. In summary, there's a cluster then of small cats eating small prey, then a cluster focusing on larger prey, and then a tidally linear relationship for the heavyweights from leopards to lions. At the transition, the European lynx can thrive on 2 kilogram hares or 40 kilogram reindeer, while the 10 kilo caracal can live on 20 kilo reedbuck. So, which species to study? We've evaluated which to prioritize for conservation and which are the most potent ambassadors for conservation. As paradigms, we've selected the 2 Southeast Asian species of clouded leopards. Why? First, we know next to nothing about them. It's a good start. But at almost exactly the same weight range as the Eurasian lynx, they hover at the flexible prey size transition. Not that we had any idea what they actually ate. Second, they're in trouble. Forgive me for using a very personal yardstick, if I may, to illustrate the deteriorating situation of Sunda clouded leopards. When I was 20, I led an expedition to Borneo, living with nomads as I searched, as it happens, for proboscis monkeys. Just 1 generation of biologists later, I was there again, helping my son set camera traps in Kalimantan for his doctorate on clouded leopards. In the meantime, in that 1 generation of biologists, Borneo had lost 30% of its forest. Indeed, in his thesis, he predicted this deteriorated connectivity for Sunda clouded leopards. Further, our team demonstrated a worsening impact of snaring and trade. This highlighted the need for customs officials to recognize clouded leopard skeletons and distinguish the two very similar species, prompting Christian Gomez to lead our development of a craniometric tool, which revealed that actually a rather simple measure of postorbital breadth largely does the trick, which Christian has built into an online web tool for customs officials to use. So the remainder of this talk presents our approach, which you might call the clouded leopard paradigm. It follows our research strategy pyramid from groundedness to geopolitics. Our impact builds clockwise on this picture from behavioral ecology through landscapes into a decision support tool and out as policy, involving a wonderful team, only some of which are pictured, but all of whom are treasured. We strive to solve a mind-bending simultaneous equation whose elements include two species, a diversity of habitats, variously competitive guilds on the mainland and on Borneo and Sumatra, loosely assembled in different combinations in different places, in each of which there are different guilds of prey. Meet a few of the prey-sized actors here. In 2012, funded by the Robertson Foundation, I began a program involving grids of 80 camera stations using 160 cameras covering roughly 150 square kilometers each over 90 days. A typical example in Myanmar's Hitamanti Wildlife Sanctuary, choreographed here by Sortun, involves reaching remote locations, sometimes with difficulty, and then facing the Herculean task of positioning the cameras, eventually being rewarded with an exciting Felid, and sometimes a consolation prize of a less exciting one, and occasional fascinating natural history, such as this male leopard carrying a sun bear cub by the throat. We repeated all this over 13 years at 22 sites in some 9 countries, some of which are named on this slide. For example, in Langtan in Nepal, Emre Khan documented our highest altitude clouded leopard at 3,498 meters above sea level. Moving east in Bhutan, the National Tiger Survey allowed us to explore this guild. In Dampa Tiger Reserve, Priya Singh led us to this guild of felids and these competitors. I've already mentioned Myanmar, which leads us on to Laos, where Arcturus Phony led us in documenting, tragically, the last tigers and indeed the last leopards. Although, much more happily, she became the first Laotian woman ever to get a doctorate from Oxford. In Cambodia, in the deciduous dipterocarp forests of Mondulkiri and the evergreen forests of the cardamoms, Jan Kamela, Phanchana and Pin Chantratana led our surveys. While in Thailand, Eric Ash led us in the Eastern Forest Complex, as did Cedric Tan in Malaysia's Ulu Muda. In Indonesia, in Kalimantan, Susan Chain plunged around these sites. Iding Hedir ran 7 sites around Sumatra's Kerinci Seblat. Our longest running projects are in Sabah, where I must acknowledge especially my friend Andrew Hearn, talking on one of your panels this evening, or maybe another evening, on the right, who in the very beginning convinced me that of all the invisible cats we might select, we should choose the most difficult. Well, now 20 years later, just last month, Christian Gomez, pictured on the left of the picture, our last and star graduate student, finished his doctorate on the clouded leopard genome. In case you'd like to know more about these people and the animals they studied, all are presented in the computer game called Unseen Empire, which allows you to play your way through our project. So, to species ecology. What did we find out? In Sabah, we found clouds in 7 of the 8 forests we surveyed, but in neither of the 2 oil palm plantations that we looked at. They occurred at densities between 1.39 and 3.1 per 100 kilometre squares. What were they doing? To find out, Andy Hearn led our exhausting effort to use satellite-monitored tags. First, motivated by an interest in connectivity, we worked with Benoit Goussen's team in the Kinabatangan corridor, a ribbon of forest cloaking the river that winds through an essential desert of oil palm plantation. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the clouds kept to the forest corridors, although you can see, if you look carefully, where this one crossed the road to get to the other side. This revealed 95% utilization distributions of 162 and 175 kilometres squared, and 50% core ranges of 35 to 45 kilometres squared, and local convex hulls of a bit over 40 kilometres squared. Next, we shifted to the primary forest of the 960 square kilometre Tawau Highlands to reveal male home ranges varying between 108 and 293 kilometres squared. But what were they eating? Scats donated by the trapped cats before and after African swine fever revealed Asian palm civets as the most frequent prey, and then bearded pigs, although less so for them after African swine fever struck. Assembling all of the evidence, Andy Hearn collated 21 records of 13 prey species, including 5 ungulates and 8 primates. Of course, you can't see the detail of this table, but never fear. What you can see is that of the 7 records of predation on primates, 6, those in the red box, were all made by female clouded leopards. And notwithstanding the laughably small sample size, we were able to compare the weights of prey eaten by males and by females, which differed 6-fold in size. Led by Akshu Rasfoni in Laos, we used DNA to identify mainland clouded leopard and tiger scats, revealing 46% of clouded leopard prey there were large ungulates. And both felids, the clouds and the tigers, preferred the 110-kilo serral, perhaps categorizing the mainland clouded leopards in that area. And let's remember their longer canines and wider gape than any living felid, or perhaps confirming them as predators of 50 to 150-kilo ungulates in that area. Meanwhile, Christian Gomez led our discovery that Sunda clouds have amongst the lowest genetic diversity of all pantherines. And although inbreeding occurs, it is rather low. Further, the best model suggests contemporary Sunda clouds in Sabah descend from just 3 clusters. Nowadays, they're rather highly admixed, which suggests that the recent fragmentation of the forest is so far yet to partition the population into isolated blocks. In short, they're still joined up genetically. So, to the next step of our pyramid, communities and guilds. One or other species of clouded leopard cohabits with all 8 of these essentially invisible small wild cats, and everywhere they cohabit with domestic cats. Assuming overlap in morphology indicates niche overlaps, we compared the skulls of fishing cats, Asian golden cats, jungle cats, and flat-headed cats, and marble cats, Bornean bay cats, domestic cats, the mainland leopard cat, and the Sunda leopard cat. That's all these skulls. Each of which is variously different. And remembering sexual dimorphism within each species, they are further partitioned between males and females. Now, clearly, the skulls of the riparian fishing and flat-headed cats are outliers in this picture. Amongst sympatric assemblages, each morphospecies, but less so the males and females of each species, are generally reasonably well differentiated. But beware, female Asian golden cats and male jungle cats do overlap a lot in skull morphometry. And inside this general mess shown on the slide there, female mainland leopard cats and female domestic cats, and female marble cats and male domestic cats on the mainland, and female marbled cats and male domestic cats on Borneo and Sumatra all overlap a lot in their anatomy, so you might think they're likely to compete. Well, what of their ecology? In Borneo, we've studied clouds along with marbles and leopard cats and flatheads and bays. Bay cats are, as you know, vanishingly rare. But we're doing well with flatheads in 17 locations around the coast of Brunei. The camera traps providing the first estimates of population densities for clouds and marbles and Sunda leopard cats. The evidence of both spatial and temporal partitioning. We made parallel analyses extending to the mainland, and this was led by Carol Sartor, who's speaking later in the conference. She considered occupancy models for species with more than 100 records in our database, of which there were some 53, from which we try to build entire community networks. For example, Pipu Joe's analysis in Myanmar of spatial and temporal overlaps, arranged here on a diminishing scale of body size, revealed that these 5 felids were partitioned more spatially than they were temporally, although for the 3 medium-sized felids in this guild, the closer their body sizes, the more different their activity schedules. Further, the largest niche differences in the use of space and time occurred between the 3 smallest cats in the guild. Or consider Karmachoki from Bhutan's analysis involving 1,129 paired camera stations concerning Asian goldens, marbles, and mainland leopard cats. Using multi-species interaction models, she revealed the habitat associations of occupancy by each species. But fascinatingly, then co-occurrence analysis revealed positive co-occurrence between golden cat and leopard cat, and negative co-occurrence, they avoided each other, between marbled cat and leopard cat, but only at higher elevations. Which brings us to landscape scale processes and the need to model habitat suitability. Evidence can come from either the camera traps or from movement data, and we tag these with environmental variables, including most recently and excitingly NASA's JEDI 3D vegetation structure, which build into species distribution models. Using these categories of variables, each of which, as you can see, has various components, each of which may have different effects on species presence at least 7 different scales, the whole schmozzle totaling more than 300 variables. It turns out that for clouded leopards, perhaps disappointingly, the prediction performance is scarcely improved by using the 3D JEDI variables. But Pat Burns led us in repeating this work for 32 species on Sumatra and 51 on Borneo, including, in addition to clouded leopards, leopard cats, marbled cats, flat-headed cats, and bay cats. By the way, although the JEDI variables were disappointing for those cats, they did improve predictions for yellow muntjac, horse-tailed squirrel, and common palm civets. You can download all 83 of these species distribution models at your will if they'd be helpful to you from this paper. And indeed, you can get them from our Wild Maps website, where there's a helpful dashboard for you to look things up. Here, for example, is what you'd get if you wanted the SDMs for the marbled cat. By the way, in an earlier analysis, we had modelled overall biodiversity from some 60 species across the continent and Sunda Islands, exploring which species and guilds are the best predictors of general biodiversity, and mapped the congruence or lack of it with the existing network of protected areas. Anyway, you'll appreciate that our purpose here is to generate habitat suitability surfaces across the geographic ranges of these small cats in order to identify core areas and the corridors between them. And this exercise enables us to identify the best habitat for clouded leopards, first on the mainland and then for the Sunda Islands. Here they are. And thereby to identify priority patches for their conservation. Having completed this exercise for clouded leopards, we then repeated it, led by Luca Chiavarani, for all 7 of the small cats, variously distributed on the mainland, Borneo, and Sumatra, to identify for the continent the areas of highest suitability for all of those small cats. They're indicated here in red. And for Borneo, again, the most suitable areas indicated in red, and again for Sumatra. And of course, things have changed. Putting it in personal terms again, it brings it home to me at least. This was a WWF simulation of forest cover when I was born. Then, when my son was born, and by the time his daughter was born, it was more like this. So much for 3 generations. What might happen next? Here's his predictions for core areas and for corridors, which brings us to the intersection between decision support and policy. Of course, this audience doesn't need reminding why connectivity is important, nor that it can be artificially re-established. You all know that as connectivity is lost, subpopulations dwindle and metapopulations rupture, and inbreeding and genetic drift lead to loss of genetic diversity and an increasing probability of population extinction. And excuse me, this audience will also be keenly aware of the genetic implications. One cat, although I confess not a small one, is an example provided by my student Taisia Marchenkova's analysis. It's an unfinished analysis concerning the Amur leopard, recovering from a bottleneck of just 30 individuals, brilliantly building back to over 100 individuals. But this white paw might be a consequence of reduced genetic heterogeneity and perhaps increased inbreeding. Now, these spatial and genetic principles are incorporated in our Connecting Landscapes Decision Support System, COLA DSS for short, developed collaboratively with Northern Arizona University, laterally with funding from NASA, and happily, new NASA funding enables Wild Crew, NAU, and Panthera to apply the DSS to new test cases, providing solutions at the intersection of conservation and development using an interactive platform with a GUI, a graphical user interface, incorporating and updating proven tools in spatial modeling and landscape genetics. Now, you'll remember how our data feeds into the habitat suitability model. This now feeds the automated workflow to produce resistant surfaces to which we add dispersal source points, enabling us to simulate both landscape connectivity and population dynamics and genetic diversity, which can then be subjected to various development and conservation scenarios. The whole system incorporating habitat models to deliver landscape connectivity, population genetics, population dynamics and genetic diversity, and enabling and exploration of different scenarios, as described in this paper. And you can download the whole shooting match from there. Here is what the graphical user interface looks like. At first pass through, we would convert the habitat model into a mirror image resistance surface, being mindful that the habitat usage of dispersing animals may differ from resident animals. This was crucially illustrated by Nick Elliott's work on lions. This software enabled Geneticaster to predict and prioritize core populations of clouded leopards at a continental scale. Myanmar, by the way, emerged as the #1 hotspot, and similarly to rank the dispersal corridors between them, culminating in a continent-wide priority map for clouded leopards, which brings us to policy and the choice between different scenarios. Here are two early case studies from Myanmar and Sabah simulating both population dynamics and genetic diversity consequences of alternative development scenarios. Both of these are already published. First, we identified the cores and corridors on the left for clouded leopards in Myanmar. Then, discussions with government revealed planning options, roads, railways, and reservoirs, that sort of thing, which we impose in various combinations on the virtual landscape to predict the likely consequences. This is on the right-hand map, where blue indicates not much difference, but red indicates the greatest difference caused by the development plan. For example, here is the collected impact of the 53 proposed dams. Again, red is bad. Or here, the proposed Indian highway. Here are the connectivity impact maps. Remember, on the right-hand side, red is lost connectivity for, in order, the planned pipelines, Silk Road, Indian highway, dams, cities, and the whole caboodle added together. And here, the associated population genetic impacts for clouded leopards of those 6 different sets of interventions. The second case study simulated the impacts on clouded leopards of 17 forest restoration projects and 41 highway and road developments under the Sabah Structural Plan for 2033, identifying in green 2 forest restoration plans with highly positive impacts for clouded leopards, and in orange the 5 road plans with the worst impacts. We could then aspire to tweak the latter to minimize their impact. Now, to explore realignments and find better compromises between road building and clouded leopard conservation. Finally, again led by Geneticaster, we modelled the impact on clouded leopard connectivity of the new Indonesian capital, called, as you know, Nusantara. Unsurprisingly, it will be bad, that's shown in red again, for connectivity in the vicinity of the capital, that's block B on the map. But if our model is right, the negative impacts are going to reverberate far to the north into block A and far to the west, that's block C. Remember, our impact is intended to build clockwise from behavioral ecology through landscapes into the decision support system and out as policy. Do we influence policy? Well, we certainly try. We got top brass from the British government, UNESCO, UNDP to this meeting at Oxford's Blavatnik School of Government. And since our first exploratory clouded leopard workshop in Kota Kinabalu in November 2009, which led to the 2010 framework plan and in turn to the formal Wildlife Department plan, we've continued to host decision support system workshops from Borneo to Bhutan, with director-level meetings in Myanmar, Deputy Prime Minister in Sabah, Minister in Thailand, senior officials in Laos, with Kuching scheduled in a couple of months' time. And not to mention parallel work in Africa there's no time to tell you about today. Well, what next? One answer is that there is only one country in Southeast Asia that has two critical ingredients. First, increasing forest cover and prey, and second, our doctoral student, Yifeng Wang, known as Leo. The country with those unique attributes is Taiwan, where Leo is analyzing the prey documented in all of these camera traps as we worked with the Taiwanese Clouded Leopard Association and Panthera to scope clouded leopard reintroduction. Leo has already mapped the suitable habitat, highlighting two especially promising protected areas, and he's identified the best corridors. The sweet spot so far looks like the Tawu Mountain region shown by the arrow. That's it, except to say, lest all this talk of costs and benefits and development and so forth beguiles us, remember that there are aspects of value that cannot be monetized. So beyond the technicalities of conservation, please don't forget the existence value of these animals. You might call it the spirituality of nature. Oh, and while these meerkats are not cats at all, let them remind you of the importance of teamwork. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Wow, that's quite a journey across geography, across species, across generations. So thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. Truly remarkable, really. Of course, you know, it's just staggering to see that transition through the four pillars coming to life. And knowledge is important to be a basis. But again, things need to feel it in the wild, and you show us that full trajectory. Now, we have a question here, actually, from Victoria Pinheiro Barbosa. And Victoria, if you wouldn't mind, would you please unmute and ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Dr. David. It was an amazing lecture, really. And I would like to ask you, actually, how you coordinate a multi-country wildlife monitoring across all those countries? Like, you were personally present at all sites? I imagine not. And so how do you address the biases in the camera trap installation, site selection, environmental challenge, like, oh, it's a trial, it's not a trial, we don't have this, it's a dense bush, or even the varianting expertise, like, oh, all of your members, all your team members had a previous experience with installing camera traps. Do you have a protocol? How do you mitigate the observer error from the different teams perceiving the environment so differently?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Victoria, thank you for the question. May I just check that everybody can hear me okay? Axel, could you nod wildly or something?
Perfectly, yeah. We heard the question and we can
Very
hear
good.
you loud.
Yeah. Victoria, very good question. And of course, everybody on this call, this conference, is familiar with the expression about the difficulty of herding cats. Trying to study the damn things is quite a challenge too. One thing to say that's important is that this didn't all happen at once. So we started, as I mentioned, principally in Sabah, and we grew from there. In addition to actually an almost lifelong collaboration with the team at Panthera, I had 3 successive grants from a wonderful foundation called the Robertson Foundation. And over each of these grants, I could add more elements. But before we started, I worked very, very hard to prepare a plan that could be translated and applied all over the world. And added to that, I had a wonderful team. I showed you a photograph of some of them. In every country, we had a local coordinator. I actually was present in all the places, although not unlike Schrodinger's cat, simultaneously. I sort of traveled around them and made a nuisance of myself. But all of the local coordinators, I think without exception, had some training in Oxford. Many of them participated in our diploma course, which Axel very graciously mentioned in his introduction, a 7-month training course to secure essentially a master's degree, a diploma in Oxford. Many of them went on to do higher degrees with us. So there was a very great consistency of protocol and training. Of course, there's variation in the practical problems of working in each place, but we did our best to control for those. And I hope that the results that emerged, as it were, emerged despite the variance caused by the sorts of difficulties that you mentioned.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Axel, as well. And thank you for the symposium, all the crew.
Our pleasure, I'm sure. Now, David, I'm going to be selfish here and ask you a question myself, if I may. One of the things that you shared with us was, I think, a bit of an inconvenient truth, which seems to be that cats don't necessarily like each other. You talked about morphology, you talked about prey, and so you even talked about habitat partitioning, not just in, as we look from the sky, but even in elevation, which is amazing. And so when you're talking about the impacts and you're modeling the impacts, for instance, of development, as you showed so nicely for Myanmar, amazing with 53 dams, Indian Highway and such, how do we best know who are going to be the winners and losers in that inter-guild dynamic? Are there certain aspects of how humans perturb the ecosystem that might swing in the favor of some species over others? And what are the implications of that for conservation?
Yes. Well, clearly it's a very, very good question. And it involves a level of granularity, a level of detail in analysis and of understanding of the ecology and the community structure of these animals that almost defies the level at which we can do science in the field with elusive, if not invisible, animals. I mean, the clear answer to your question, is it going to be different between different species, and how do we know the winners and losers? It is going to be different. In some of our species distribution models, we can see that some species, most notably, I would say the leopard cat, both the Sunda and the mainland leopard cat, are clearly able to accommodate the habitat changes associated with living near people. So both those species, as others on the call will know, turn up in camera trap surveys in oil palm plantations, which are essentially death to most other of the members of that guild. So yes, people changing the environment will advantage and disadvantage different species differently. I think behind your question, there was an even greater layer of subtlety, which is absolutely intriguing for the biologist, possibly a level of granularity beyond what we can cope with in conservation planning. And that is how the changing situation of one species or several species may have reverberations for the situation of others. I mean, we can see, and in the 2 case studies I gave, actually from Bhutan and Myanmar, we can clearly see that members of these small cat guilds affect each other. As a generalization, clearly bigger cats brutalize smaller cats. And I think it's becoming clear that the closer their body size and the closer their morphology, the more the hostility between them, which would be an entirely intuitive sort of interpretation, that your closest rival is your, the one you hate the most and you exert the greatest pressure on. Of course, it may well be that the worst impact is 1 or 2 sizes down from your own size, because you may hate the one just smaller than you, but you may be strong enough to absolutely beat up the one 2 or 3 sizes smaller than you. So we can come up with some generalizations about that. Incorporating those into planning is really asking a lot. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would like to close by saying, and I guess everybody on the call will realize this, but it's something that over my entire career has struck me more and more. And I know that it will strike you too, because not everybody in the conference may realize that you very cleverly started your career with canids. This is a wonderful training for anybody. And anybody who's worked on both canids and felids, as both you and I have, will appreciate that this business of intra-guild competition, this interspecific hostility, is absolutely rampant in both those families, where bigger canids harass smaller ones, bigger cats harass smaller ones. And so while the man in the streets or woman in the streets intuition is to worry about predator-prey relationships, anybody working on the conservation of these two carnivore families has to worry just as much about intra-guild community competition having unexpected consequences. So I think it's important you flagged that with your question, even if my answer was a bit vague.
Not vague at all, informed by decades of experience, because the answers aren't that easy. And thank you, though, for exposing both of us as not just caring about cats, but dogs as well. Now, I'm guilty of that, but happily proud of it, that we share this experience with many others probably around the world as well. Well, David, what a treat, and thank you so much. Kristen, I'm afraid we can't get to your question presently, but perhaps we can follow up to get that to David and get you some answers as well, because we do need to keep the time. Next time I'm in Oxford, we can chat longer about all these things. David, here we need to move on. Thank you for this unbelievable privilege and for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye. All right, and then with that now, actually, we will just take a short 5-minute break before going to some speed talks. So I'm going to ask you, actually, as I look at my clock, to be back in 5 minutes, which in reality means you should really be back in 3, because some of you will be late. But we will start again in 5 minutes from now. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're just kind of joining back in again. Hope you were able to just get a quick water or something like that as a break. Now we actually go on to a mixture of talks in terms of format, from ones that are smaller and larger. And truth be told, when we saw all of the amazing abstracts coming in, we totally changed our program because we didn't want to reject a whole bunch of talks. Again, we weren't able to accept that many. That said, I think we've got 56 talks in total. So we have the small format and larger one. I'll always do, or my other colleagues over the day, is an introduction. I thought it's important for all of you to get to know each other. Then to have a short segment. At times, if speakers are going long, it might be necessary to interrupt, and I will politely say to please wrap up, as it's important to stay to time. One thing as well that I was amazed at with Africa Massive is that actually with the closed captioning, if you just click on that little button, you see my speaking language, and I believe, and I haven't tried it, that you can actually click a language and that AI will transcribe the language for you. I'm very sympathetic to this, as English is not my first language. And so, having over time learned it, I suppose, I still am very thoughtful always of those, who might not have English as a first language. So perhaps that helps, especially as we speak in English with very different accents from the different countries that we come from. All right. So we'll get right into our first presentation, which is actually, in this case, a recorded presentation from Muntasir Akash. And he's a faculty member in the Department of Zoology at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh, researching the ecology and conservation of small wildcats and other understudied carnivores. He's trained in statistical ecology at the University of St. Andrews. He combines quantitative analysis, field research, and community engagement to support practical conservation outcomes. And with that, we'll head to the recording.
Good afternoon. My presentation is about promoting human fishing cat coexistence in the lower Ganges plains of Bangladesh. So firstly, where's this side? To explain this, I want to draw your attention to the right side of the slide. So this map was published in the Global Ecological Conservation 2025. There I wrote a paper on conflict hotspot of human fishing cat negative interactions in Bangladesh using media reported incidents. So this blue circle area, as you can see here, is among the country's highest human fishing cat conflict zones, where fresh conflict incidents emerging roughly every 2 weeks. But interestingly, there exists no structured coexistence framework in operation. This area south of the Ganges is high human use floodplain system. It is relatively less developed compared to other parts of Bangladesh, seemingly stuck in the 1990s. So in this region, we have undertaken a small project, which includes three-part activity and supported by Aruna Foundation, a local NGO here. So this project includes outreach and rapid response, which encompasses awareness campaigns, consumption graphic and billboards, youth rapid response network, and supporting local forest department with proper equipment and helping them in rescue drives. We have also initiated camera trap monitoring and deploying camera traps at poultry and fish farms to document the activity of fishing cat and other small carnivores that share the area, such as jungle cat, bull and jackal, and several civil species. So this is still an ongoing project. We are planning to do social research to map people's perception and identify conflict drivers while engaging farmers, fishers, students, and leaders, community leaders. So the project is already providing tangible evidence. Regarding outreach, we have carried out a total of 75 awareness programs in form of 25 street processions, activities at 19 schools and colleges in the study area, conducting roughly 10 mapping bouts, including one elaborate activity on the World Fishing Cat Day 2025. In total, we reached out to more than 7,000 people in person and about 1,800 people on social media. Regarding rapid response, the Youth Conservation Club we are working with and training them. We have rescued one fishing cat from a private menagerie, a private zoo, which was featured in a Leading English Daily, the Business Standard, as you can see here. We have also treated one fishing cat injured from a road accident in collaboration with the local forest department and released it on site. So regarding camera trapping, the Youth Conservation Club we are working with, they are already deploying and monitoring camera traps on their own. This is to create a citizen science framework similar to MammalWeb going in the UK, so that citizen scientists can monitor fishing cat activity on their own. So the deployed camera traps at fish farm, we have already got 250 trap nights worth of survey, and we have experienced so far zero camera trap theft or vandalization issue. So this is a densely populated area, but before deploying the camera traps, we engage the local people explaining the purpose of our research and building trust. So this is another measure of the project's wider impact. Now is the time for seeing some fishing cat footage. Here is one. Another one. With duo in this footage. On the left side, there is a duck bed. So why launching a new project? To explain this, you can see the latest red list assessment map published in 2025. So Bangladesh holds roughly 30% of global fishing cat range, of which 95% of fishing cat breeding areas are outside any protection scheme. So Bangladesh has many promising fishing cat conservation activities, but they're all concentrated in the blue circle area, the Haur Basin region, particularly in the Hakolaki Haur and Ramsar site, encompassing roughly 180 square kilometer area in the full monsoon, and Baikyaville, comprising 1.5 square kilometer in the full monsoon. So we need to replicate these activities and create several more conflict hotspot-based conservation activity in other parts of Bangladesh. So the next step with this project, we aim to expand camera trap coverage across additional farms. We want to examine ALS surplus killing behavior of fishing cats, which is one of the primary reasons of the negative interactions ongoing in Bangladesh. As a second part of the conflict hotspot mapping published in the Global Ecological Conservation, we want to examine media narratives of fishing cat, how they're portrayed on media, and how that are fueling negative interactions, because existing work shows fear is the primary driver of these negative interactions. As part of this project, we want to strengthen youth response and institutionalize forest department involvement. From the interview survey, we want to prepare perception maps, examine the efficacy of awareness programs, because these awareness programs are often targeted to mitigate conflict incidents and minimize negative interactions, but their efficacy is barely tested. So we want to test them. And currently, we're looking for more funding and collaboration opportunities. So lastly, securing fishing cats in Bangladesh will not happen inside protected areas alone. It will happen in working wetlands where people and fishing cats share the same water. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Wonderful to see that transition as well between the work in the field and the engagement with the communities. Now, Muntasir isn't able to join us, of course, that's why we had the recording. So we will not have a question and answer at this point. But again, feel free to reach out to him if you can. And then we'll go on to our next speed talk by Vanesa. And Vanesa Bejarano, I'm sorry if I'm saying that badly, Alegre is a researcher specializing in the ecology and conservation of carnivores in South America with a strong focus on small and lesser-known felid species. Her current work explores how these cats persist, interact, and are often overlooked in human-dominated landscapes of the Anthropocene.
Thank you. So, hello and thank you. Today I briefly present a small cat big difference, the result of habitat selection and host sensitivity across 7 Brazilian small Felid. In each slide, you will find a QR that will take you to more information about the study. So, move. So, using information from the literature and IUCN species account, we categorize species into generalists, flexible specialists, and strict specialists. These ecological traits were used to difference predicted response under habitat transformation and growth expansion. The key question was, do ecological traits explain different response to human-modified landscape? Under the study framework, we used open access occurrence data, conducted a national scale analysis, and modeled habitat selection and road proximity. We found a strong specific variation. Some pattern matches expectation. For example, strict specific species show conservative association with native vegetation, however, other not. For example, Geoffroy's cat, a species classified as a generalist, showed clear avoidance of modified habitats, contradicting categorical expectation. In the other groups, like Pampas cat, we observe a conservative habitat response with limited evidence of adaptation to highly transforming landscape. And also strict specialists as Samargay show a strong forest defense, but occurs near agriculture age. Under road proximity response, we found frequent road detention in some species, near complete road avoidance in others, and not consistent pattern by category. This indicates that infrastructurality, permeability varies substantially among species. In addition, we determined the roads with the highest frequency of occurrence for each species throughout Brazil for future conservation guidelines. This finding led to 3 conservation implications as I listed here briefly. Do not assume tolerance from presence, identify a species-specific risk profile, and design target road and landscape interventions. Ecological trait is informative, but management must operate at a special level. Finally, under data gaps and next step, limited data restrict inference, particularly for data for taxa such as the group of Pampas cat or Cola complex. Improving occurrence record is therefore a conservation priority. So that is me. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any question. If you have another question after the symposium, you can contact me by my email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And by the way, attendees, don't be shy with your questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. Overall, I really like this multi-species approach that you've taken, and also some of the cautions that you're sharing with us. and pointing out that the differences in the data quality, I think, is really important. I mean, how David referred to invisible cats, for instance. How can we best engage governments, I think, with this kind of information? Because it's so important in terms of designing the road networks. Would you have any advice for us how we can best communicate with them?
Well, yes, I think one thing that we need to improve better is to all the scientists to try to share more the data that they recollect, and also use an application for science citizen science, for have more data for many of their cats, not only cat, no small cat, about all the biodiversity mammals.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vanesa. It's intriguing. And thank you for having those QR codes in there as well. It's very helpful. Excellent. All right. And so now we're actually moving on to Jacqueline Bishop. And Jacqueline is an associate professor in the Institute for Communities and Wildlife in Africa at the University of Cape Town, where she lectures and carries out research in the fields of animal ecology and conservation biology. She's a founding member of the Urban Caracal Project, a decade-long research initiative focused on the ecological strategies of caracal in and around the city of Cape Town. And Jacqueline will actually be giving us a bit of a longer talk as we explore this journey. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for joining us.
Is that okay?
Perfect, 100%.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Sorry about that, everybody, and hello from Cape Town. We've been studying caracal in and around the city of Cape Town since 2014. And in addition to being very passionate about this species, we also use our findings to think about biodiversity conservation both within and outside of South Africa's protected area network, because urban densification and expansion is really going to be an important determinant of how we use landscape and make it available to wildlife in the future. There we go. At the core of our project is, this is the picture of the three of us who are at the core of our project. Dr. Laurel Serious was the founding member of the project when she came to Cape Town, and I hosted her as a postdoc. She had been working on bobcats and mountain lions in the mountains above Los Angeles. And Dr. Gabriella Layton joined us actually as a student and is now the project coordinator. So this is the team, the main core team. So as many of you know, cities still support permanent wildlife communities, including both small, medium, and large carnivores in some places, where clearly they act as important sentinels of ecosystems. But whether these carnivores become winners or losers in these transformed landscapes very much depends on how they navigate all the risks and rewards associated with human transformed landscapes, such that their ecological responses to novel threats and stresses are the most important determinant of being a winner or a loser. So we work on caracal down here in Cape Town, and you can see from this map their remarkable distribution across Africa, the Middle East, and into Central Asia, and tipping into the northwest corner of India as well. And across that range, they're very famous, I guess, for their remarkable ecological flexibility. Down here at the bottom of South Africa, we're in Cape Town, the oldest and largest metropole in the country of South Africa, population sort of nearing about 5 million. And we also have a very long history from the mid-1600s onwards, so 17th century development onwards, of agriculture and slow urban expansion, such that the city today is this very complex mosaic of natural, urban, residential, industrial, and agricultural landscapes. The city is also shaped by its geography, very much so. The Cape Peninsula is a very famous part of the city of Cape Town, and in the middle of it, colored in green, is Table Mountain National Park. Very famous for its high species diversity and endemism. And while this area back in the 1600s through to the 1800s supported a lot of carnivores, including jackal and hyena and leopard and Cape lion, today we find the caracal basically taking the position of top predator. And on that peninsula, Caracal have quite a large amount of space, about 380 square kilometers of land, about 300 kilometers of coastal area. But the landscape is highly variable, including its elevational range, land use from agricultural and natural lands and wetlands to very, very high density suburbs and a dense old city, central metropole of the city, as well as very highly exposed areas along the southern tip of the peninsula, the very famous Cape Point area. And in this area, we use this multidisciplinary approach to try and understand how urbanization impacts not only Caracal, but also the rest of Cape Town's wildlife, hopefully trying to inform better biodiversity management and promote human-wildlife coexistence. And I'm going to just talk you through some of the findings that we have made over the last 10 years. We started colouring Caracal, We started colouring Caracal back in 2014 using GPS colours, a drop-off system, collecting lots of different types of spatial data. And in trapping and colouring animals, we were also able to sample blood and hair, collect data on sex and their body condition, etc., and also to get a sense of how exposed they are to ticks. The ecology of the Cape Peninsula has quite a high tick load at certain parts of the year. Throughout the project, we've also had a very active social media presence to enhance public awareness of biodiversity and of Caracal. And through that awareness, we've had a very successful public reportings program going on for the last 10 plus years. This is an image from our project website where you can report sightings and also alert us to animals that have been killed on the roads. And that obviously then increases our sample set. So here's some of these very nice public photographs that we receive. And by getting data on mortalities on the road, that also increases our sample set to think about aspects of when you have a dead animal, what you can collect from that animal as well. So our samples are 29 live animals that were collared, and currently we're on about 145 road mortalities. So this is a summary of that GPS collar data collected from 2014 to 2017. On the right-hand side, you can see the peninsula, and you can very clearly see that Caracal are very much locked into the Cape Peninsula. The two different colors indicate adults and juveniles across the sampling area, but we see basically no movement in or out of the system while we were collaring animals. The public sightings data has also been really useful. Whilst that's taken much longer to collect, obviously, over the last 10 years, here is an image on the right-hand side that really strongly approximates the GPS collar data. We've just recently, last week, published a paper on the utility of this type of public sightings data, such that it also has the same type of power to model aspects of spatial use as our GPS collar data. So have a look out for that. Using that collar data, we can also determine a whole load of aspects of the ecology of the species. So here we have some data on home range sizes, and very typically for solitary carnivores, male home range sizes very much so exceed females. We have males having average home range sizes of about 74 kilometers squared, females only around 17 square kilometers, and young subadult males somewhere in the middle there of about 33 square kilometers. And on the right-hand side of the figure, we have approximated home range estimates across the map, and you can see that every little bit of green space available to Caracal is used by them, and that their home ranges, the neighborhood, let's just call it this way, the neighborhood is pretty jam-packed across that landscape. We've also explored the GPS color data using a lot of really nice ecological models, including step selection function models that tell us something about how Caracal alter their ecologies at the urban edge. And this is just a plot to show how, as animals become tolerant of the urban edge and choose to stay in that space, they completely lose, for example, their night-day behavior, such that within that urban edge where they're able to exploit resources, they're active during the day as well as during the night. That diel behavior is actually, that loss of diel behavior is quite common for carnivores adapting to city landscapes. We've used our GPS collar data also to help us understand something about diet and aspects of the foraging ecology of caracal. Using GPS cluster analysis, we have been able to find prey remains, lots of hard work on the ground, I must say, to find prey remain clusters, and whilst collecting data from those areas, doing surveys around that area to also look for scat. And that research has involved 600 plus scats, looking at 700 clusters and finding about 85 kill sites there. And we've also then used that data to inform aspects of resource selection function analysis across the landscape, aspects of their trophic isotope ecology, and also pollutant exposure in animals. This is just a nice visual summary of aspects of their highly generalist diet. Caracal are famous for being bird specialists, but across the peninsula, they eat mammals, antelope, genet, and mongoose. They also eat a lot of insects and reptiles. They do have a very small proportion of their diet being domestic cats, but really what they prefer are birds and, interestingly enough, native rodents, and I'll come back to that. Our isotope ecology approaches using fur and also whisker samples from when we had animals, either dead animals from the mortality samples or when we were coloring animals and collecting hair samples, has revealed lots of really interesting aspects of their broader trophic ecology. While we know that they're generalists, it's also very clear on the peninsula that you get very individual specialists within the area as well. And they also show quite a lot of temporal variation across the peninsula seasonally, as well as aspects of where you actually find them. So whether they're in the northern, more developed area or in the southern, more sort of wild and natural areas. And we have coastal foragers as well, so caracal who really like to feed on seabirds along the southern coast of the peninsula here. And our trophic analysis of isotopes reveals how being a marine specialist basically expands the trophic niche of caracals in those areas. Unfortunately, it also takes cats into being exposed to pollutants on the urban edge. And we've documented exposure to things like PCB, DDTs, metal compounds, quite a lot of rat poison exposure as well through secondary exposure and bioaccumulation, such that while the urban edge has got lots of diversity in it in terms of prey availability, it very much certainly looks like it's a potential ecotoxicological trap for animals who are able to tolerate the areas. We've also looked at aspects of their physiological costs of exposure to all these pollutants, showing quite a lot of burden on immune responses and hemoglobin values. And we're interested in how that data also interacts with aspects of their tick-borne pathogens as well. Last but not least, we've been very interested in the genomic consequences of isolation. So 50 years of increasingly limited dispersal, across about 25 generations, certainly looks like it's leading to aspects of all the classic examples of being a small isolated population. So reduced heterozygosity, increased genetic drift captured here as well, and such that I think we have a classic population sort of entering into the first stages of the negative effects of being isolated. Just to finish off with, I just wanted to point out that one of the things we're focusing on now is aspects of causes of mortality. And obviously, when you're studying these types of cats and the public engagement in the project, we have very good data on the importance of road deaths in cats, as many people will report on this as well, such that we've been able to identify these road crossing hotspots where cats are very likely to get killed. And as part of an outreach project, we've been working with an artist on a little bit of public awareness around caracals in the landscape using these really beautiful I've just forgotten the word. These beautiful road signage. So just to summarize then, using this multidisciplinary approach, we've shown how caracal are very adaptable to urban environments, but they face very significant threats. We have many key findings, including aspects of their behavioral flexibility, their ability to hunt and succeed in urban adjacent areas, shifts in their trophic footprints, pollutant exposure, aspects of mortality, and the genomic costs of isolation. I think one of the greatest highlights of the project has been the citizen science and outreach success, which has been vital to how we can carry out the project, certainly fosters community awareness and allows us to operate on a scale that's just not possible if it's a team of professional scientists alone. And clearly this multidisciplinary approach really helps us to communicate management strategies and policy recommendations to local and national government, whilst also highlighting the immense importance of public engagement in, particularly in urban wildlife research, where there are a lot of people around. So just to acknowledge, this is an enormous project. So many people have been involved, in very important vets, collaborators, co-authors, and incredibly generous funders. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. That just came across perfectly. And I see that Christine Breitenmoser has actually raised her hand. I wonder, Christine, if I'm just looking at the Q&A here. If you wouldn't mind, Christine, if you did have a question of just putting that in the chat, or in the Q&A rather. But actually, Jacqueline, we do have a question from Chiara Samosir. Would you mind unmuting and asking your question, please? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the insightful talk, Professor Jacqueline. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, thanks very much, Chiara.
Yeah, so it's very an interesting project, and I was wondering, in terms of the citizen science approach, what are the most influential factors for ensuring a successful citizen science for collecting roadkill data and sightings? And what do you think are the biggest challenges you've encountered? And also, you mentioned about the road mitigation for the mortality. Do you also measure the impacts after implementing such approach, and how does it look like after implementing it? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Those are great questions. I'll answer the road signage and potential mitigation first. We started the road signage project as almost a response to how very, very slow working with the government actually is. It's going to take a long time before the Road Agency of South Africa actually is willing to put signage up. But so we went a bit rogue and started working with an artist. We don't know anything about the relative impact of the road signage beyond the fact that people are very aware of the signs and know about them. I don't know if it changes people's behavior with respect to how they drive in certain parts of the city, but it also helps us galvanize action with the government itself and the willingness to engage with putting up road signage. So I'll report back on that next year because we're working on that at the moment quite intensively with the city. And then just with respect to your question on citizen science, when we started our project, we kind of like immediately started a citizen science sort of outreach component. We created social media platforms, we developed our Facebook approach, and we gave a lot of public talks. And slowly we built up public awareness across the city, engaging with the public, but also engaging with the government agencies as well. And over time, I think that has just grown very organically through people's awareness. But we do give a lot of public talks to all kinds of groups of citizens, whether it be to schools, homeowners, conservation agencies, NGOs, etc. And we make ourselves very available to speak to anybody about what we do. And I think that has been absolutely critical to public awareness around the project. And we've also had our website present right from the very first day of the project as well, encouraging people to report sightings and to report the road mortalities. You've got to go and get the road mortality very quickly though, and that's one of the pressures that we experience on the project, is that sometimes when we get to an area where an animal has been reported, the animal has already been taken for all kinds of reasons. They are taken off the road when found dead because they're quite a valuable bushmeat animal as well to eat. So you've got to have a really quick response time and lots of willingness to either keep the dead animal safe for us or for us to get to the animal very quickly. But I think that's actually been quite a successful part of the project as well. It just requires a lot of commitment from a team of people to do that. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you. Such a great work. Best of luck with everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, Jacqueline, you're incredibly popular here with excellent questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we do have to move on, but I'll ask Angus from our Africa Massive team to make sure that we capture these questions and get them to you, because as I say, there are good ones, but I'm just trying to be respectful of time for our others. Thank you for an amazing presentation, but based on amazing period of work spanning the urban-wild interface and so many different aspects, from toxicology to genetics to diet, and such application incorporated into outreach. Wonderful. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Axel. Thank you very much to your team. I'm happy to answer all your questions on the chat.
Oh, brilliant. Wonderful. All right. So with this now, we will move on to Michaël Meeus, who's a PhD student at the Evolutionary Ecology Group at the University of Antwerp, and whose research focuses on studying felids through genomic data. Welcome, Michaël.
Thank you very much. And I hope everything is working as it should. I should be sharing my screen now, and you should be able to hear me as well.
We see a lovely yellow cat looking at us. Thank you so much.
Okay, fantastic. In that case, I will start straight away. So hello, everyone. I'll be talking about genomic diversity in felids and its relevance for their conservation. Now, of course, genetic diversity is very important. It is the key resource for selection to act upon so that species can adapt to novel circumstances, which is, of course, very relevant in this day and age of a rapid global change. But also we know that low diversity is often linked to various health issues. This can include physical defects, compromised immune systems, or even fertility issues. But despite this, genetic diversity is not typically considered as a criterion for risk assessment, which we believe is a bit of an oversight. And while there have been studies on genomic diversity in felids, typically those studies are either limited in their taxonomic scope, or they combine estimates from different studies. But the problem is that you can't really compare those estimates because different studies will use different software, different reference genomes. So that was one of the main ideas behind this project, was to get these estimates of heterozygosity for as many species as we could, so that we can compare them across the entire family. And so to have a short summary of our methodology, we obtained whole genome short read data from the sequence read archive. We aligned those to two different reference genomes, one of each subfamily in the cat family. We then called for variants, so basically looking where our reads differ from the reference genomes. And then we used that information to calculate heterozygosity. And then we looked for correlations with things such as their geographic range, population density, and of course, the red list status. Now, the reason for using two reference genomes, I already mentioned before, but there's a chance of introducing a bias if you use a reference genome. And so we wanted to check for this by using these two different genomes. And actually, if you look at the estimates, they're actually very similar between the two. There are a couple of samples that do differ, and these are typically either samples from tigers or samples from the genus Felis, so species very closely related to our references. Now, it does imply there is a bit of a reference bias, but luckily it's not to a degree that it actually influences any of our conclusions, which is, of course, ideal. Now, this is an overview of all of the heterozygosities we measured. Don't worry trying to read everything. I will go over a few interesting parts in a moment. But some things you can already see here is that there's a lot more data available for large cats compared to small cats. As well, we also used captive samples to sort of increase the amount of samples we had. And especially for small cats, we were forced to rely mostly on captive samples, which is, of course, a bit limiting because that could be the case it doesn't reflect the natural situation exactly. And a final thing you may notice is that there's no one lineage that is uniformly low or high in diversity. There's a pretty good spread within each lineage. And in fact, even within certain species, we can find quite a good spread. Now, within a species that is large, like the puma, we often have very good data, and we can actually link this diversity to different populations and their demographic histories. But with some of these smaller cats, like the fishing cat you see here, where we only have captive samples to use, often with little to no information on the original population or their pedigree, we actually can't really say whether this spread in diversity is because they are this spread out in nature, whether this direct different populations, or whether this is simply the consequence of in or outbreeding in captivity, or maybe a combination of all of the above. And I'm sure you're also wondering which species have the lowest diversity, which have the highest, of course. And at the lower end, we find mostly vulnerable and endangered species, as we might expect. A couple of large ones, like the snow leopard and the Indian lion specifically, which was the lowest actually in this study, but also one of these fishing cats, as well as an Andean cat, which has very low diversity. And actually, this Andean cat is a great example to use for this spread in diversity within a lineage. Because if you look at the other end, we find that the Andean cat's congener, the ocelot, actually has the highest estimates we found in this study, followed closely by the serval and then the Afro-Asiatic wildcat. Now, these are all three species that are fairly common and widespread, which actually leads nicely into the next point, which is the correlation with their geographic ranges. Now you can see that there's positive correlations. Species with a larger range will tend to have higher heterozygosity, although there are not that many species that actually have a high range. And there is a noticeable exception here, which is the northern ocelot, which is actually quite interesting. Now you can see there's another ocelot species in the southern one. The southern one is already on the right, which has quite a broad range comparatively. Now the reason for ocelots having high diversity can be possibly explained by two different reasons. One is that ocelots are found to have a high degree of gene flow between populations. So this may help keep diversity high compared to other species with similar or even higher ranges. As well as their population density is quite high, which we will see in some of the following slides. There's one thing that this doesn't explain, however, and that is that the northern species actually has, or northern subspecies, sorry, actually has a higher diversity than the southern one, when typically this is supposed to be reversed. And we don't have a proper answer to why this is the case. It has been suggested that maybe there has been an event that introduced some highly divergent alleles into the population that our sample hails from. But as far as I know, there's been no conclusive evidence to show that this is in fact the case. So this will remain a mystery for now. Moving on to the population density, we actually encounter a problem initially because, as you can see, there's no significant relationship here. And the reason for that is if you look towards the bottom right of the graph, you can find this Guinea sample or cot-cot, which has a very high population density, but a quite low diversity. And this points to a second issue that we encounter when trying to use these small cats, which is that not only do we have a lack of available genomes, but also data on things like population density is often quite lacking. There are quite few studies, sometimes from quite a while ago as well. In case of the cot-cot, also a study in pristine habitat, where the density is of course high, but it's likely to be but not the case across the entire range of the species. And even the ICN Red List actually uses a more conservative estimate for their assessment. And if you use that estimate, then we do find a positive relationship where higher density species tend to have higher levels of heterozygosity. And we can indeed see that the ocelot ranks relatively high in this category. Although the eagle-eyed may notice that the Felis libica, the Afro-Asiatic wildcat, actually is quite low in this regard, despite having high heterozygosity. But actually in the range graph we saw earlier, it was quite high on that one. So there appears to be an interesting relationship between geographic range, population density, and how they influence or relate to heterozygosity. Now, of course, those parameters are all very important to the viability of a population, but what about the red list status themselves? Now, we found that there was also a significant relation with red list status, with species with higher diversity typically being ranked lower in the lower threat category, so more towards least concern. And you can also visually see that diversity tend to decrease as threat category increases, with a notable exception of critically endangered actually being slightly above the endangered category. And as well, you may notice there's a bit of overlap between the different categories. So they don't all differ significantly from each other, which does indicate that it will be very hard to assign a species or a population to a specific category based on genomic data alone. However, if we take a more broad approach and we subdivide them into threatened versus non-threatened, we do find a highly significant difference where that non-threatened species have over twice the average heterozygosity of threatened species. Of course, you're probably noticing that there are a few samples in the threatened category that have quite high heterozygosity. Now, to explain this, we should probably explain the limitation of genomic data, which is that there is going to be a bit of a delay. And what do I mean by that is if you have a species that is currently declining or has recently declined, and I believe this is at least part of the case for most of the species that are outlying here, it will take some time before genetic data actually catches up to this decrease in population, because you need a few generations of mating before homozygosity will increase in this population. So that just places a limit on how useful genomics is in terms of assessing very recent declining populations. But despite that, I do think we have shown that genetic diversity can be used as a fairly decent indicator of, at the very least, threatened versus non-threatened species, with, of course, the limitations of recency in mind. We also found that it correlates relatively well with important aspects of population viability, such as the population density and geographic range. Although we will need more precise assessments, ideally more towards population level, whereas here we were most limited towards species or subspecies level. And of course, we need, especially for small felids, we need a lot more accurate and modern data. And I find, of course, a big issue that I've been talking about this entire presentation is that there's a very strong bias towards strong cats in terms of the data that's available. And that is, of course, something that I'm sure everyone at this symposium will agree we need to change. And I think we don't just need to change what we research as researchers, but also what the public thinks is important. And to that end, I actually want to end off with more or less of a saying we have in Dutch, which I don't think exists in English. But it's, if you don't honor the small, you don't deserve the large. And I actually think that's quite relevant to small cat conservation, because when most people think of what felids to conserve, they probably think of lions or tigers or all of these big species that they expect to see on a safari. But very few people rather will think of the black-footed cat or the flat-headed cat. Maybe sometimes they will not even know that these species exist. But of course, these species are no less important to their ecosystems or no less interesting to study. In fact, they might even be more interesting in many ways. So I think that that's something that we should also focus on, not just researching, but also promoting these species. And of course, a symposium such as this is a great step in that direction. And I hope that we can continue to do things like this to promote research into these species. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michaël. Absolutely amazing, especially across all these taxa. Now, Mauro Lucerini has a question for you. Mauro, please unmute and go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. My question is, well, rises from my work, which is on small cats in South America, and especially the Andean cat. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think that the Andean cat is consistently below the regression lines that you showed us?
That's a good question. I don't know too much about the specific ecology of Andean cats, actually. I don't think they have too broad of a distribution. I think they are pretty limited in various pockets. So that could be an issue. I do know we also looked at population sizes, but we found no significant correlation because actually there's not enough data on specific populations. So I think perhaps that could be a key player, because unless I'm incorrect, I believe Andean cats have quite a low population size overall. So if they're also spread out in different pockets, I think that could be a good explanation for why the diversity is so low in this species.
So probably a connection between low population size and fragmented, limited distribution.
Yeah, that is what I would assume. But if talking about genus Leopardus, actually my co-author Jonas is finishing up his PhD on that, so he might also be a good person to ask about those species specifically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mauro, and thank you, Michaël, for the question. Actually, can't resist asking a question myself, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
When you look at when you look at the heterozygosity and you compare it so interestingly across the threat classes, if you will, the IUCN threat classes, what comes first, the loss of heterozygosity and threat, or being threatened and then losing heterozygosity, if you know what I mean? Like, is the threatened status in some way resulting from being very inbred, or the other way around?
I think it's probably worked both ways. As species decline in populations, they will get more and more inbreeding or more inbred. So diversity will decline, which can then result in health issues or less resistance to diseases. I think there was a case where a lot of cheetahs that are very genetically similar, a lot of them died because one disease was actually able to spread very quickly to that population because there was almost no resistance to it. So yeah, I think it's a combination. It's going to reinforce each other. Yeah, did that answer your question more or less?
It does. It absolutely does. I know that's probably hard to tease apart, but it makes a lot of sense.
There's also the case, for instance, that I think is interesting is because critically endangered species in our data had a high rate of zygosity on average. And for instance, the Asian lion, which was the lowest diversity we measured, was actually in the endangered category. And I believe it was considered critically endangered back in 2000 assessment, and then in 2008 it was moved up towards endangered because the population had stabilized and I think maybe even grown at this point. And of course, when that happens, the diversity doesn't necessarily increase immediately. The diversity stays low because it takes a long time for diversity to increase again. I mean, even humans, we have a sample size of 8 billion now, and we have very low diversity among ourselves because we have these bottlenecks in our history. So in those cases, you might have actually a higher threat status for a species that may still be quite vulnerable, but we don't know it because the genetic diversity isn't really considered in the actual threat assessment.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Those are interesting examples too. Thank you so much, Michaël. Really intriguing. Wonderful. I'm sure others will reach out to you again as well. Excellent.
Yeah,
all right.
Feel free to.
Okay, great. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Natalia Muñoz Cassolis, who's a lawyer, a policy specialist, and conservation social scientist, focusing on biodiversity governance and illegal wildlife trade. Her work supports NGOs and public institutions in strengthening evidence-based conservation policy, advocacy initiatives, and strategies. Welcome, Natalia.
Thank you, Axel, sorry. Let me put my presentation on screen and let me know if you are able to see it. All right, and it should go into presentation mode now. Are you able to see it in presentation mode?
Absolutely perfect. Looks wonderful.
Awesome. So I'll be talking today about the overlooked illegal trade of small felids in Colombia. So as I'm sure you all are very familiar with, there's a massive trend in trading big cats such as jaguars, tigers, lions, and there's also evidence on cheetah trade for pets. And these studies started not different from any of those. We actually started looking into jaguar trade in Colombia. And as we were collecting data, patterns started to emerge that led us to our current study. So let's start by looking at the different cat species we have in Colombia, the native species, going from the upper left corner to the bottom right corner are jaguarundis, ocelots, northern tiger cats or oncillas, margays, pumas, and jaguars. So what are the trade regulations applicable to these species? So at an international level, ocelots, oncillas, margays, and jaguars are all considered Appendix 1 for CITES purposes, and Colombian populations of jaguarundis and pumas are considered to be Appendix 2. This implies that international trade in all these species is heavily regulated, requiring permits to move them across borders. What's going on within Colombia? Within Colombia, we have jaguars and oncillas only considered as endangered, and they have a vulnerable category. However, in Colombia, the capture, poaching, possession, transformation, transport, storage, and trade of any wildlife specimen requires the issuance of a permit by an environmental authority unless it is performed by local communities as part of their right to subsistence hunting. And the absence of such a permit implies a violation of the Colombian legal regime, which then can have two different pathways for sanctioning. The administrative sanctioning procedure, which implies fines, and or, because we could have both, if that the case merits, criminal charges, which imply fines and prison penalties up to 11 years. So let's just pin the fact that possession of wildlife is forbidden in Colombia unless you have a permit. So what is it that we did? So we considered seizures, confiscations, rescues, relocations, and voluntary surrenders of wildcats as proxies of cat illegal use and trade. And how did we obtain the data? Well, we sent public information requests that are protected under the Constitution in Colombia to all 45 environmental authorities, and we requested their records on law enforcement events involving wildcats between January 2015 and November 2021. 31 authorities replied, and their jurisdiction covers 88% of the Colombia's territory. So we have a very good picture. As you can see on the map, only the green areas are the ones we didn't have a portrait of what's going on in terms of illegal cat use and trade. And what we did with the information we received from these authorities was a multi-year national level portrait of illegal felid use and trade in Colombia. First, we did descriptive statistics, frequency tables, and chi-square tests for species, products, and type of law enforcement event. And then we wanted to understand where this event had happened. So we did this spatial mapping of all these data. And later on, we wanted to understand the temporal distribution, what has been going on throughout time. So we used the Poisson family generalized linear mixed model, where the year where law enforcement had taken place was the fixed effect, but the environmental authority where those law enforcement events had taken place was considered as a random intercept, just acknowledging the difference in resources from one environmental authority to the other in conducting these type of law enforcement operations. And what we found was very striking. We found that 708 individuals had been illegally used or traded throughout these almost 6 years of study, which implies that almost one cat was taken out of the wild every 3 or 4 days, which is it's a lot. But most importantly, our findings reflected that unlike what you usually would think is that big cats are very threatened by illegal use and trade, and in a region where predominantly information goes to jaguars, we found that smaller cats were the most affected ones by the illegal use and trade, where ocelots were the majority of those individuals involved in these law enforcement events. So we see that only large cats accounted only to 12.4% of the individuals, while small cats accounted to 79.5% of all the individuals. And we say at least because we had some law enforcement events where the specific species was not included. So at least we know that 79.5% involved small cats. But even more surprising was the fact that 78.5% of these individuals had been trafficked alive. And when we looked at the type of law enforcement events, where we had 643 events, we saw that more than 80% of these events involved at least one live individual, predominantly ocelots with almost 60% of all events. And this was the greatest revelation in our study, the fact that we were expecting, of course, confiscations and seizures to be the most predominant law enforcement event. However, voluntary surrenders were the majority of those events with 60.1%, and the chi-square test confirmed that voluntary surrenders occurred significantly more than other law enforcement type. So what are voluntary surrenders? So voluntary surrenders in Colombia take place in one of two circumstances. One, when someone possesses wildlife as a pet and want to relinquish voluntarily the individual because it's sick, it has become aggressive, or they're no longer able to provide for the animal. But remember that we said possession is illegal. Possession of a wildlife individual is illegal unless you have a permit. So there's a contradiction between the general norm on wildlife possession and this specific provision on voluntary surrenders. And the second case where a voluntary surrender might take place is when an individual is found in a public road or in the wild, it is injured or abandoned, and the person who recovers the animal wants to ensure their well-being. What's even more important to highlight in terms of the voluntary surrenders is that unlike confiscations and seizures, where the legal consequences are very clear and they could either provide an administrative or criminal sanction, it is not entirely clear what the legal consequences of these voluntary surrenders are. So unclear what happens to the individuals that are surrendering these wild cats to the authorities. So in terms of our spatial analysis, what we found was the law enforcement events were unevenly distributed across the country. And most of those law enforcement events were concentrated in major urban centers like Medellin, Bogotá, and Cali, which are three of the largest cities in the country. And voluntary surrenders were also concentrated in large urban centers like Medellin, Pitalito, Popayán, and Cali. If we remember that voluntary surrenders are due to pet keeping or finding an animal stranded, it's odd to find those being predominant in large urban centers. And at the departmental level, we found that Antioquia and Córdoba were predominant or hotspots for law enforcement events involving wild cats, for voluntary surrenders of wild cats, and the number of felids involved in those law enforcement events. So later, with our temporal analysis, we confirmed that these type of law enforcement events involving these species are significantly increasing over time with a 6.93% increase per year, that live wild cats being surrendered or recovered by authorities is increasing significantly per year with 5.49% increase year over year. And for voluntary surrenders, while they seem to have an increasing trend, it is not significant. It is not statistically significant, but in general, we see an upward trend in all of the studies we looked at. And here it's also worth highlighting the dip in 2020, which is most likely attributable to the COVID-19 pandemic, and given that Colombia underwent severe lockdown. So these could also explain why there is a dip in law enforcement events and voluntary surrenders as well. So just to sum up, what are our key findings is that we, unlike what we were expecting to see, significant jaguar trade or pumas involved in human-wildlife conflict or stuff like that had been seized or those type of events, what we found is that the illegal use and trade in Colombia was most predominant in small felids, particularly in ocelots, that the majority of the individuals that had been recovered by the authorities had been live individuals, that the majority of these law enforcement events were voluntary surrenders, where it is unclear what the legal consequences were to the individuals involved in those relinquishes, and that there was a major concentration around urban centers and some accelerating trends. So the question that lingers for us is that it could be potentially indicating a pet market within Colombia for smaller cat species. And what are the conservation implications of our research? Well, it challenges the narrative of a decreasing small cat trade, at least for Colombia. It also raises questions on whether we are getting a full picture of the illegal use and trade of small cats in the region if we are not accounting for voluntary surrenders. So it would need to account for that type of law enforcement event, for instance, in Peru or Ecuador, where they have the same legal mechanism. And it particularly highlights that voluntary surrenders might be potentially masking the true scale of the illegal Felid trade in Colombia, as confiscations and seizures are the ones mostly used to assess the size of the market when we're looking at these type of cases. And if anyone wants to take a look at the paper, here is a QR code and of course my email if you want to get in touch.
Really, really terrific. And of course, we were corresponding about the paper, which I also highly recommend. Also very recent, just mind-blowing, honestly, to unveil this. Now, we do have a question. I'm trying to call on the person, but they are registered as an anonymous attendee, which makes it harder. For someone who wrote a question that starts with, for small cats in South America, if you want to unmute yourself, say who you are, and ask your question, please do. Otherwise, I'll pass it on. Okay, I'll just chime in. It says, for small cats in South America, is there a greater demand for pets domestically or internationally? Do you have an idea of where the largest markets are internationally?
So we didn't look at the international trade because we were only looking at what's going on within Colombia's boundaries. So it is unclear if the trade is international for the scale of it, and it seems to be national, not entirely clear if there's an international pet trade for these animals. I'm sure there is. I don't just know the scale of it. We were able to understand better the scale of what's going on within Colombia's borders.
Yeah, thank you. One thing, just listening to you, I mean, even having read the paper, is I thought this is really showing an even bigger problem, I suppose, as you've identified. Because if I understand it correctly, is folks might be taking some of these species into their home, maybe for pets, and then they surrender those that are not very good pets. However, I imagine there are others that are being kept as pets and that they aren't all surrendered. And how do we have a feeling for how many people actually have wild small cats in their homes? And a connected question on this is, I know for hunting, sometimes the more rare something is, the more precious it is. Mm. And I know you might have the data, but could you guess whether those species that are more rare, perhaps threatened, would be the most precious to try and have in your house?
So I do not have the data on how many might be in homes and we are not aware of them. However, the mention you're doing to the rareness of the species, and this is undergoing work. We are doing a second paper on the voluntary surrenders and how they're actually operating and using felids as case studies. But yes, there is a preference for some of these animals, let's say like the ocelots that we evidenced, because they look as symbol of status. It's pretty much what has been going on with drug lords keeping large felids. There's an increasing interest in certain sectors of the population for ocelots as pets because they do reflect symbols of status. They are rare, very expensive, and hard to get. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean the answer, not the situation. Thank you so much, Natalia, for joining and for sharing that with us. That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And so next we are on to Santiago, Turcatti, Oviedo, who holds an MSc in biological sciences and is a conservation biologist specializing in small wildcats of the Uruguayan Pampa biome. He is the founder and director of the Uruguay Small Wildcat Program, ROC and Pampa, integrating field research, conservation action, and emerging technologies for biodiversity monitoring. Welcome, Santiago.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you see my, let me share my screen.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay.
And we see you as well. With
yes. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, now we see your presentation as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, hi everyone, my name is Santiago Turcatti, and I will present a brief overview of our work on integrating science and community action for the conservation of small wildcats in the South American Pampa biome. So, the South American Pampa is one of the most transformed grassland ecosystems on Earth, and the small wildcats here face an accelerating habitat loss, fragmentation, road mortality, and increasing conflicts with rural communities. Yet, in Uruguay, long-term ecological data has historically been extremely limited. So conservation decisions have been made with very little field-based evidence. So ROC and Pampa was created to close this gap, integrating rigorous field research with community-based conservation and science-driven communication. So ROC and Pampa was founded in 2021 by me, and we are member of the Small Wildcat Conservation Foundation under the leadership of Dr. Jim Sanderson. And here we have a map to see where Uruguay is, and we work on Uruguay and the south of Brazil and Rio Grande do Sul. So since the 2021, we have been working on a systematic monitoring across the Uruguayan Pampa, and we have deployed more than 65 trail camera stations across protected areas and private lands, accumulating over more than 1,800 trail camera trap nights. That represents the most comprehensive contemporary dataset on the small wildcats on Uruguay. So during all this project, we have been able to confirm the presence of 3 small wildcats in the Uruguayan Pampa. Most importantly, we obtained the first live record of the Pampas cat, which is an endemic and critically endangered species, the Leopardus muñoz. So after more than a decade, we have been able to record the first record of this species here in our country. And this provides critical evidence for its persistence and directly informs national conservation priorities. We also work on the activity pattern of this species, and this also reveals temporal niche partitioning supporting coexistence. So beyond data, and we transform research into action. Yes, we established a human-wildlife coexisting network with rural landowners. We promoted voluntary conservation actions on private lands, and we implemented roadkill monitoring and awareness campaigns. And also, we delivered environmental education in all levels, schools, high schools, and for people that live in rural areas. Not only actions, we also work in some scientific articles. Here are some examples. This is the last one that we made with Dr. Jim Sanderson about the updated distribution of the Leopardus muñoz in Uruguay and new records. And we also made an article about the mammal community of the protected area here in Uruguay. So ROC and Pampa demonstrated that locally led initiatives can generate robust scientific evidence while producing measurable conservation impacts. grassland ecosystems are underrepresented in global conservation agendas, yet they hold unique small wildcat diversity. Our model is scalable across the South American pampa and other fragmented grassland systems, so we demonstrate that local leadership, science-based evidence can change conservation trajectories. So this is carried out by Rock and Pampa and Small Wildcat Conservation Foundation, and here are our partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Santiago. Really terrific, and yeah, just amazing. I had the privilege last year of just being on the Brazilian side, and as we were looking at Pampas cats, amazing, or Muñoz, I should say, and as you talk about them as being such a special species, and I keep waiting for the classifications to understand them better. I wonder, when you do the community outreach and when you tell folks, here's a species that is so unique, does that translate into a local pride?
Yes. Most of the people that you talk never hear about this species, and what happened with the Pampas cat here is the species that can be confused like a domestic cat. So when people in rural areas see this cat, they say, "Oh, it's my uncle cat." So they didn't perceive as a small wild cat. And when you talk about this species to the people and show them images and how this rare is this species and is unique, people start to take care of it, because they feel this feeling of it's an endemic species only from here, and we need to take care about this species. And also with the other ones. The small wildcats here in Uruguay is very underrated. So nobody was doing nothing about this species here. So when we started with this project, going to the school, show this species to the kids is amazing. They never feel, they never imagine that we have this species here.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, good for you, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, and I just, folks online, I just jump in with my questions when there aren't other ones. So please feel free to jump in. But I think the reason when there aren't questions is because our presenters are just so clear and good. I mean, I've been so impressed. So thank you, Santiago. That's excellent. All right, and now we will move on to Ilaria Agostini. And I think we have a recording, which you might also be on for question and answers, I think. So we'll go with the recording. Ilaria is an Italian researcher working at the Argentine National Research Council, Grupo de Ecologia y Conservación de Carnívoros de la Patagonia. Sorry about this. All new Spanish speakers, starting from 2022, together with the co-authors, Laura Florencia. Ilaria has started a project aimed at evaluating the conservation status and threats to the Huina cat in northern Patagonia in Argentina. And with that, I think we have a recording queued up.
Hi all, we are going to present some of the early results of our project on the Huina in Argentina. The Huina, the smallest wildcat of the Americas, is endemic to the southern parts of South America between Chile and Argentina. Can be found in either spotted or melanistic colors, and its diet is based mainly on small vertebrates. The Huina has been recently downlisted from vulnerable to least concern, most likely reflecting improved information rather than true change. However, its relatively narrow strip of Valdivian and Andean Patagonian forests, which are extensively protected, providing refuge from various threats. Nevertheless, here the Huina is classified as vulnerable. The Huina is facing different threats in Argentina. Firstly, wildfires, which have had and still have a devastating impact, affecting habitat but also threatening directly the survival of these cats and all biodiversity. Retaliatory killing also occurs when local people perceive the Huina as a threat to livestock. Roadkills and attacks by domestic dogs and cats also contribute to the decline of Huina populations. Our project represents a key step toward understanding and protecting this Huina population. We combine camera trap monitoring, study of people perceptions, as well as threats mitigation community engagement, and education to reduce human-wildlife conflict. Across 3 years, we carried out the first large-scale camera trap survey in Nahuelhuapi National Park throughout a variety of habitats and different human impacts. Thanks to this large survey effort, we found that relatively abundance of Viña is higher in the western portion of the range. This insight could guide future conservation efforts and prioritization. We also explore the human dimension with interviews with local residents. Our goal is to understand how residents perceive the Viña, their attitudes toward the species, and the management strategy when conflict arises. Local farmers generally know this species. Although the perceptions of the Viña is generally positive, there is a small portion of local residents interviewed that have acknowledged this Felid as a problem and have acknowledged to have killed Viñas after poultry predation. A crucial step of our project is to apply our findings to inform threats mitigation strategies, especially with Viña Working Group and national parks. For example, our research has identified specific areas that need immediate attention for road signs installation, and we have already installed 5 signs focused on Viña. Finally, we have worked in education in local schools as well as outreach, participating in different events, also as Viña Working Group. So thank you very much for your attention.
There we go. I slightly hesitate to say something about the cuteness of this, because I know people from across the world will disagree, but because they love their own ones in their backyard, but it's got to be one of the cutest ones. Just checking in here on questions. There is a question from Mauro Luccherini. Go ahead, Mauro.
Hi, Ilaria. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I was wondering if you think that your results from this area, which is a specific protected area in the northern part of the distribution of this cat in Argentina, can be are applicable and similar to the remaining distribution range in Argentina, or if you expect differences, variations?
I think that some differences could be expected because the restricted area of range area of Viña in Argentina also encompass different types of forests that are not similar in many ways to the Nahuelhuapi National Park. For example, Viña in the northern part of Lanín also inhabit Araucaria forest, and in the south and southern south of Nahuelhuapi inhabits the Los Alerce National Parks, which hosts much larger remnants of Valdivian forest. So I think that maybe we could see some variation in density of the species according to the type of habitat. And maybe also, of course, according to the type of human impact. It is very difficult to understand the role of the human impact because these are very large protected areas, but there is an increasing amount of tourists every year visiting the park. So even though maybe there is not the human impact in the sense of, I don't know, cities or very large settlements, tourists may have a great impact because they reach a lot of remote areas also in the park. So I think there is a huge amount of variety of diversity in the distribution of densities of the species according to these 2 factors, environment and human impact.
Very good, very good. Good question, Mauro, and of course, excellent answer as well. Excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience with us as well, Ilaria. That was absolutely wonderful. Great. All right. And with this, we will push on actually to Ehsan. Ehsan Moqanaki, is doing my best here, is a steering committee member of the Manual Working Group. He is now a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Montana in the US. Welcome.
Thank you. So hopefully you see my screen. Yeah, so I'm presenting some results from an expert opinion survey that we did at one working group concerning different aspects of Polscat research and conservation needs. So this map shows the respondents that we have received in our survey from 15 range countries. So we received a total of 66 responses, and darker colors shows the number of responses from each country, and this blue polygon is the IUCN range map for the Polscat, just to give you some ideas about the range of the species and also the responses that we have received. So we asked different questions from our respondents, and we asked them to rate the importance of each question in relation to Polscat in their country of expertise. So for example, here are different threat categories that we identify for the Polscat, and for each row and each column shows responses from one country. So this pie shows the proportion of responses, and darker colors show that's higher importance for the Polscat in that country. And the gray bars show the overall across all countries. For example, in this example, free-ranging dogs and prey decline, climate change, and livestock were identified as the most important threats for the Polscat across its range. We also asked respondents to provide some information about their background and also their level of expertise about the Polscat, and then we use that information to quantify if these variables have influenced their rating of different questions. For example, in this example of threats that I just showed you, we found out that those who believe that they're heavily involved in Polscat research and conservation tended to rate these threat categories higher and more important for the Polscat in the countries. And overall, after all these questions that we answered, we try to rank these countries in relation to each other in terms of the threat intensities. So in this plot, the countries that are closer to top right have a higher threat intensities based on the responses that we receive. So each circle is one country, and the size of that circle shows the number of respondents from that country. And of course, the caveat was that for some of these countries, we had only one respondent. But you can see that a lot of these countries are grouped together in the center in terms of the threat intensities for the Polscat. And we also ask our respondents to provide or suggest priority sites for research and conservation in each country, and then we map that, and you can see that a lot of these sites are located as transboundary sites between at least two countries. So we consider these can be useful for identifying areas for focusing research and conservation in the future. And of course, in this survey, the caveat was that we had an uneven sample of respondents from the countries. So on the left, I plotted the share of Polscat range in each country, and you can see it's dominated by China, and most of the species range is in China. But in terms of respondents, we of course had a different representation of these countries. And thank you for your attention. Please feel free to reach out for any questions. Thank you.
Terrific. Ehsan, I'm just checking the questions here. Otherwise, I'm going to jump in. On one of the graphs, if I was interpreting it correctly, when you were asking questions across different countries, it looked like climate change was coming in quite heavily. Did I see that right? And if so, I mean, how would it actually exert itself? I mean, how would climate, yeah, that's the one. How would climate change have an effect on the environment or on the individuals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, these are perceived threats. Of course, not for all of them we have direct evidence that they are affecting Polscat. But because Polscat in a lot of countries occur in mid-elevation to high elevation areas, and I think there is evidence that because of the ongoing climate change, there is some impact on rodent populations. So Polscat is a specialist predator of small mammals, picals, and small mammals across its range, and there is evidence that the climate change has caused disruption in the population cycles of these small mammals in a lot of countries. So there is this concern that because of these changes in the prey population dynamics, it is also going to affect Polis cat. And also because of the climate change, there is evidence that people also, the livestock breeders, are also moving towards higher elevation areas. So disturbance by livestock is also going to be higher now in the higher elevation areas. So I think that's overall the current perception by a lot of people working in these areas, that they think that climate change is one of the concerns for the Polis cat.
And you really hit on something there. I think with that example, that is probably worldwide. I mean, the idea that humans are moving up mountains, for those specialists at high altitude, that is indeed a worry, and you illustrated nicely here. Thank you so much. It's very insightful. Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, we now next have, hope I'm saying it okay, Chiara Correa. And I think we'll be playing a recording for her. And she's a biodiversity and conservation biology specialist. She has over 8 years of experience working for nature, empowering young people in conservation, supporting community-led tourism and projects, and collaborating to create corridors. She's currently pursuing a master's degree in GIS at the University of Salzburg and coordinates biological monitoring and connectivity projects in Ecuador and Paraguay.
In the past, the chickens walk freely, and we didn't suffer from this problem, said to us Don Bolivar during one of our visits. 60 years ago, very few people lived in the highly biodiverse cloud forests of northwestern Pichincha. Today, those cloud forests are home to smallholder families and their domestic animals, and as you can imagine, poultry losses are now common. Small wildcats, including the clouded tiger cat, margay, ocelot, and jaguarundi, are frequently blamed and killed in retaliation. And as expected, when chickens disappear, tolerance disappears too. To better understand this conflict and begin to address it, we create Felinos de Monte, a community pilot project. So far now, we have focused on promoting community engagement, help to build predator-resistant chicken coops, and also participate in local festivals and community meetings to share information about the felines and their ecological role. All farmers reported at least one attack in the last year. Some lost more than 20 hens. Despite that, the farmers are not only helping us monitor wildlife with the camera traps, but are also very exciting to learn about the animals that live with them. This pilot is helping us test practical, affordable solutions that protect livelihoods while conserving small cats. So the issue we observe is not only about the chicken's depredation itself, but about how we manage our shared landscape, both the domestic animals and our understanding of wildlife around us. Our next step is to expand this work, but also train and empower local youth to lead solutions to the other threat that we are seeing through this pilot, as lack of knowledge about the diversity of cloud forest felines, hunting for consumption, dogs and cattle in the forest, or deforestation in key connectivity areas. We are grateful to Pampas Cat Working Group and Beat Cat Rescue for their support, and we also like to thank Panthera for organizing this meeting.
Wonderful. And there we have you on screen as well. Okay, so I'm just kind of cutting myself off here. I find it so fascinating. And I'm just going to try this out for size with you because you are so experienced in this. whenever I hear about human-wildlife conflict for cats, wild cats, there's images of jaguars attacking cattle or lions, attacking cattle or people and everything like that. And sometimes I say, I bet that the highest degree of human-wildlife conflict is small cats and poultry worldwide. But you can correct me on this. I'm just throwing this out to be outrageous. What do you think?
Thank you very much for your question, Axel. And definitely in this context, and here in the northwestern of Pichincha, that is the mainly conflict, because we have cattle as well in the forest, but not jaguar anymore. So the pumas sometimes attack, but the babies, cows, and not the biggest one. And then yes, it's constantly how the people tell us, like, I lost my chickens last week. The whole year I bought and then I lose again. So something is happened, and definitely is interesting that we have this hypothesis that is related when we colonized this space is not long time ago. So that means that probably is the time that the tiny cats need for learn how to hunt our poultry. So in that sense, is like why I start of the story of our friend Bolivar, that they a long time ago leave the poultry walk freely. But what happened in that moment? The cats didn't know maybe what is a chicken, and a chicken is a food as well. And also what happened with the prey, the natural prey here. And that means that a long time ago, they have enough food, but maybe now not anymore. So there's some interesting topics that we can discuss about, but yes, definitely poultry conflict is the most continuous repeatedly from the people.
Yeah, amazing. And that's the wonder and the great thing, isn't it, about science, about conservation on the ground, about engaging communities, is that when you're tackling these issues in your home country, they might be just as relevant to someone in Asia or even further abroad. So again, if perhaps over time one can set up groups even with the registrants. Because even the registrants, will change by day and then because of the different time zones. But if there are special issues, maybe there's a way to do that. We'll give it some thought afterwards. Anyway, thank you so much again. That's wonderful. And there's some
Thanks
positive comments in the chat as well. Just celebrating your good presentation. Great. All right. Okay. Just hanging on here for 1 second. Okay. Now, we have our last speed talk of the day coming up with Juan, Camilo, Cepeda, Duque, sorry. And we have it up on screen already. That's wonderful. And Juan is a conservation biologist from Colombia, member of the Tiger Cats Conservation Initiative with experience and interest in linking population monitoring to threat mitigation actions on a flagship small wildcat species of the tropical Andean ecosystems, the clouded tiger cat.
Welcome, distinguished attendees. Today I will share the results of a monitoring and conservation project focused on clouded tiger cats and their interactions with domestic dogs in an isolated protected area of the Central Andes of Colombia. But who's a clouded tiger cat? Also known as the Bogota cat, Leopardus pardinoides is a small white cat primarily distributed in the tropical Andes. Nearly half of its distribution is in Colombia and is closely associated with Andean cloud forests and páramos. It is a solitary predator that feeds mainly on small mammals and ground-dwelling birds, playing an important ecological role in pest control and serving as an indicator of forest integrity. Clouded tiger cats are currently classified as vulnerable by the IUCN due to habitat loss, hunting, illegal trade, roadkill, and negative interactions with domestic dogs. In Colombia, illegal trafficking remains a serious issue, with at least 89 individuals confiscated between 2015 and 2021. Another emerging threat is the invasive tourism on domesticated clouded tiger cats, particularly in the great landscapes where they can attack chicken coops. Understanding how this species persists in human-modified landscapes, particularly in the presence of dogs, is critical for improving conservation strategies. Between July 2022 and September 2023, we deployed 23 camera traps in the Alto de Nudo Soy Conservation District. We obtained over 100 detections of clouded tiger cats and more than 200 detections of dogs. Using this data, we model occupancy and evaluate how habitat features, human pressures, and intergroup competition influence both species. We also analyze daily activity patterns using kernel density functions and diet niche models. We found no evidence for spatial segregation between clouded tiger cats and dogs. However, clouded tiger cats were more likely to use steep slopes, which may reduce encounter risk. Dogs, in contrast, showed higher occupancy in forests with lower canopy height, typically associated with disturbed areas near agriculture. Notably, we found temporal segregation. The tiger cats were primarily nocturnal, while dogs were diurnal, suggesting that time partitioning as an important coexistence mechanism in this system. These findings directly inform our conservation actions. Because dog occupancy reached 84% of sites, we expand our vaccination and sterilization campaigns across the entire protected area. Additionally, since dog activity peaks occur around the midday and early afternoon, we now conduct household visits early in the morning to maximize owner participation. Our experience demonstrates the importance of leveraging robust ecological data on invasive species within protected areas to effectively mitigate their impacts on threatened small wildcats. Beyond fieldwork, we also engage rural schools through environmental education, emphasizing that responsible pet ownership is essential for the survival of clouded tiger cats, and that every child is essential in this endeavor. Thank you for the invitation.
And thank you to Juan for that presentation. Excellent. And I'm not sure now if Juan is actually on with us. He might have just been sending this in. One thing that I have to say is I am so impressed actually with the talks and the timing. I mean, all of you will probably know how difficult it is to present a short talk, and I found them tremendously effective. I think Mark Twain said, you know, he was apologizing to someone saying that he didn't have enough time to write a shorter letter. That's because it takes so much effort. So good job, everyone. Long talks too, of course, but especially doing that in 3 minutes, pretty admirable. And across, you know, all the different countries and different primary languages, I've been super impressed. Excellent. Okay, so that's absolutely wonderful. We have gotten to the end of our talks. We're going to take just a short break here before our first panel. And so just hang tight. We'll just take, let's see now, we're just deliberately running a little bit late. We'll take about 10 minutes here before joining into our next panel. Thank you, everybody. Please stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. Stay tuned, hang tight. It's worth it because we're going to talk about how do we escalate global awareness to help small cat conservation. We've heard a little bit about outreach here, but we're going to bring on some experts that are going to help us through some tricky questions. And you get to ask some tricky questions as well. All right, hang on. Hi there, and welcome back. Here we are at the end of day one, and everything leads up to the panel at the end of every day. We have amazing presentations. We had a keynote. We had a plenary talk from Professor Macdonald. We've had long talks. We've had small ones. We've traversed the world, really, and gone and touched on so many species that we look to help. But now, as well, we have the privilege of engaging with some experts in terms of key questions, which I think sometimes are missed. And here is one that we will tackle together. It is, how do we escalate global awareness to help small cat conservation? So Angus, if you could let's see if we can get the four of us on screen here together. That'd be amazing. I see Celina. I see the first Sean. And I see a second Sean. I mean, it couldn't get any better. You know what they say, two Seans are better than one, right? Welcome to all of you. We've had a very engaging day. I've seen actually that you've been following along as well. And it's a real privilege to be able to have the three of you on our first panel. I will introduce you here. First, Celina. Hi. Celina Chen is a Chinese-Dutch wildlife conservationist, award-winning photographer and campaigner who founded Overstories, a creative impact agency that harnesses culture as a force for nature, blending storytelling, strategy, and imagination to build movements and shift systems. An ecologist turned activist, she led Friends of Aldabra, uniting over 30 organizations to halt a $300 million luxury resort threatening the UNESCO-listed Aldabra Atoll. Formerly a board director, now ambassador for Panthera, she's been recognized by Wildlife Photographer of the Year as both finalist and judge, and recently named one of the Dazed 100 Asia Youth Change Makers. What a privilege, Celina, to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And with the Seans, I'm going to just share that my stepbrother is called Axel, and his last name starts with a W. So they used to call him Waxel and me Maxel because of my Belgenschlager name. But I'm not going to do the same to you, Sean Mowbray and Sean Southey. I'll try and find a quicker way. First of all, if I can introduce Sean Mowbray, he's a freelance journalist joining us from Scotland. Thank you so much. Many of you will have read articles. I think Sean's probably the most prolific journalist in terms of small cats. I'm just going to throw that out there. He often covers lesser known species that fly under the conservation radar. His reporting has appeared in Manga Bay, New Scientist, Hakam Magazine, Earth Island Journal, Discover Magazine, and others. Thank you, Sean, for joining us. And Sean Southey, so lovely to see you since we last saw each other at the World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi. Sean currently serves as Chief Executive Officer at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. His career began at Environment Canada before moving to the United Nations Development Programme's Environment Team. He's been the Secretary General of ICLEI, Vice President of RARE, and a decade as President of PCI Media. Sean has spearheaded more than 100 campaigns worldwide, garnered over 100 awards, and reached billions of people with information and initiatives aimed at protecting life on Earth. From 2016 to 25, he served as chair of the 2,000-member IUCN Commission on Education and Communication. A dual Canadian-South African citizen, Sean holds an MSc from London School of Economics and a BA in Economics from the University of British Columbia. So thank you so much, Sean, for joining us as well.
A pleasure. We have to learn to do shorter profiles.
I must admit that I kind of reduced them a little bit already because all of you are so accomplished that I had a hard time. But here we are. It just shows how privileged we are to have you. Now, our overarching task here today is to address a question: how do we escalate global awareness to help small cat conservation? But I'll just chime in here, sort of a bit of a devil's advocate, if I may. And say, you know, conservations around the world are busy enough. I mean, they're raising money, they're doing science, they're taking action in the field. And so, I mean, really, why should they even prioritize communication with their limited time? If anybody wanted to volunteer, otherwise I'll pick on you.
I can jump in.
Yeah, Celina, go for it.
I think, I mean, and this is coming from having spent lots of time in the field and started my career as a scientist, but I think we all know, having, you know, practiced conservation, so much of it is kind of managing expectations and managing people and managing communities and working with them. And time and time again, conservation can lead to real hiccups by not considering the communication element. And we know that kind of like real lasting change requires both the kind of the systemic and the practical, legislative change and change in how people engage with the world. But I think for change to be sustainable and lasting, so that when conservationists leave a site, it actually, things stay as desired. I think we also need like the intimate and the philosophical and the emotional change of how people view nature and how people interact with nature. And so that is the kind of critical element of communications. And also we have to address like so many challenges to wildlife, especially small cats, it's behavior change. If you impose legislation without necessarily socializing that change, that doesn't lead to lasting and sustainable action. So, yeah.
You touched on a word there, which is very non-scientific, Celina. I didn't just point this out, which was emotion. I mean, emotion is the type of thing that as scientists we're not really trained or maybe even discouraged, because we're supposed to be objective and we're supposed to be systematic. And so, I mean, isn't the emotion just confusing? I mean, why should we talk about emotions when we have statistics?
Because no one changes their behavior based off of data.
That's a statement.
People, and this is, if we look at neuroscience, if we look at psychology, if we look at why people make decisions, and most of the time that is an emotionally motivated choice. And the more we, pretend that we're all objective and level-headed and we'll always listen to the science, the more we lead ourselves down a path of not actually getting anything done. And I think like if we look at the state of the world, if we look at how, climate change denial and how scientists are treated in policymaking spaces, I think it's a really great kind of, that's that kind of a lot of the evidence we need to show that like most people and movements are made based off of feelings, which I think, when I was a scientist, I think I was told you've got too many feelings here. And so it's the marrying of the two. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Very good. I'll go to Sean Mowbray first, because you've reported on so many of these species, and a question that I have, if you ask any child, they're going to be able to identify an elephant, a rhino, or a lion, right? Have small cats got an image problem? I mean, are they just not big enough? Are they not cool enough? Are they not beautiful enough? Are they not interesting? Are they not dangerous enough? Is that why most people either don't know or don't care? What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think that is a tough question. I think unfortunately, these animals will spring to mind: the tigers, elephants, etc. So in terms of the image problem for small cats, I don't think that's helped sometimes by their unfortunate naming, which is not attention grabbing. One springs to mind, a flat-headed cat. Yes, it's very descriptive, but what more does it tell you about that species? Where does it live, etc., the sort of environment? So I think there's that aside that. But when people can be shown these species and learn about and be exposed to them via videos or images, they are striking. They're very incredibly beautiful cats. So I think there's definite value to, sharing these images, whether that's a camera trap image or a low quality video of a species that we don't otherwise see. That aspect of small cats being, not easily seen and invisible almost can be attention grabbing of itself. So that's really, motivation, I'd say, for conservationists to be putting these animals to the forefront, to challenge that aspect of that they are, otherwise just not known, that in itself is a value that we can kind of utilize to spread the word about them, is that we're just not seeing them very often.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Sean. And going to the other Sean, Sean, I mean, you've just put together a tremendous publication for IUCN, which I'd invite you to talk about. But one of the things in looking at it is, how do we even know who to communicate to and why?
So thank you. Axel, always a fan of your work and a big lover of both small cats and Panthera, so it's a delight to be here. So the publication we put out is jointly from a colleague of mine, Manfred Open, a German behavior change expert, and myself. It's about 150 pages. It's how you design a campaign to move behavior. And one thing I'll point out, one of the big insights for me in putting this together and the work I've done over the years is this is art meets science now, but it's very sophisticated programming. We're not back in the days when we, on a Friday night, say, let's put up a billboard or let's do a limerick. Or these are really thoughtful, structured programs when they work well across a range of allies. And it's not a one-size-fits model. We have the very surgical behavior change of like social marketing that looks at how do you get Axel on a bike on Friday afternoon, all the way through to the broad heartbeat work that Celina talks to, or how do you get people to fall in love with small cats at a more meta level to change the way they shop and vote, invest, and prioritize their conservation. And I believe when it's done well, conservation through behavior change or conservation through communication is not a nice to have. It's not an add-on. It is essential to the paradigm. If we look at the top 6 threats to small cats, habitat fragmentation, human-wildlife conflict, even climate change, genetic isolation, all of these are human problems, not cat problems. And so we need to get allies and friends helping us design effective campaigns that brings the artist and the scientist, the fence and the communication in a thoughtful collaboration. Our 10-step guide that we produced is an attempt to just take people through the 10 steps. Know your audience, figure out what you want them to do, how do you reach them, who do they love, who do they trust, how do you pay for it? What partners do you need? How do you measure? And how do you cycle back and start all over? I hope you'll share it, Axel, with this group.
Yeah, definitely. We'll find that in the chat. We'll distribute it, and I think even on the different days, because again, we get different people across time zones and across the different days. Absolutely powerful. Yeah, I think that's that it's so important, but it's so sometimes untangible. And one of the things about conservation in general is it just something that's depressing? I mean, do people listen to a problem and then they go, you know what, here's another problem. I don't want to engage in it. It's hopeless anyway. I can't do anything. How do we, Celina, if you have a go at that, how do we tackle that one?
I think you really hit the nail on the head. We can also see in the data. I love, Sean, that you mentioned that campaigning is not a shot in the dark. It's a precise, calculated effort. And marketing agencies and companies use really sophisticated tools to manage our consumer emotions to sell products, and conservation should do the same, but with ideas and initiatives. And with the question of things feeling depressing, yeah, the data does show that people are feeling fatigued, and kind of we're living in the noisiest time possible. Everyone is constantly inundated. And so how does conservation stand a chance to cut through the noise? And it's what's so important, and especially for young people, is to make people feel really like genuinely empowered that they are making an impact. And it's all about communicating the impact of those actions. Signing a petition doesn't really work anymore, because what does that do? Where does that go? No one really knows where that goes. It just kind of released into the ether. But if you can, and that's what we do at Overstories, it's like really targeted impact campaigns. What is the direct outcome that we are trying to achieve through communications, and how do we do it strategically? Is that legislative change? Is that behavior change? How do we measure that? How do we make sure that the people who are paying attention and following along get that reinforcement and that feedback? So I think on the one side, impact, positive reinforcement, feedback loops are super important, but then also stories of hope. because conservation, yes, is really depressing, but there are so many beautiful stories of hope. And again, something that scientists don't really love to do, like anthropomorphization, but telling individual stories of individuals makes such difference. I mean, just look at, I don't know if anyone's seen Punch the monkey that has taken the internet by storm. There, every now and then you have individual animals that just go wild, and we know also the data shows that like animal content is what performs best on the internet. It even outperforms, Joe Rogan yelling at things. The two things that perform well online is antagonistic debate and animals. So I think we're really uniquely positioned to take advantage of that as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, actually, a comment, a question from our participants, and I wonder, Sean Marbury, if you could tackle this, because it's an interesting issue. I don't know if we've all heard about it. Mauro Latrini, please feel free to unmute and make your comment or question to see how we could help.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk with you guys who have a lot of experience. It was more of a comment than a question. When we are talking about the depressing aspect of conservation, I think that it can be more depressing for those of us who are doing conservation day by day in the field with very little resources, when we have to face challenges that are global, like climate change, or to give a more specific example, like lithium extraction, which is affecting potentially very heavily species like the Andean cat. So I think that it is also related to communication, and I think that is something that we should take into account when we plan our strategies for long-term and global conservation of small cats.
And Sean, just to position you, Sean Marbury, on this, is how do we bring awareness to issues, maybe complex issues like this? And I'm thinking of this particularly in the context of a lot of the world now, we're in 10-second reel mode. And when there's a complex issue, how can we bring that to the public to help folks such as Mauro?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I completely understand that this is it can be incredibly depressing and challenging to to be working on the conservation research of these animals, but facing these global problems, and it's a topic that's coming up a lot in conversations with many small cat conservationists, some of whom are on this call. I think that there's two sides. So there's the deep dive into the complexity of these challenges, of the issues that are facing the cats directly, and these overarching problems that Mauro's referenced there, such as lithium mining and climate change. The small cat conservation does have, and its advantage, I think there's a lot of positives there to kind of cut through that doom and gloom cycle in conservation, that there are small scale actions that can be taken, like the chicken coops, which are being implemented around the world, that can really start to address some of the core issues. So I think there's a need to really showcase the wide variety of challenges that are facing small cats, so be that deforestation or land use change or any of the other multitude of issues, but also highlighting and forefronting that even though it's out with the possibility of conservationists to necessarily tackle these directly, there are actions that are being taken on the ground, and that these are having real positive action.
Yeah, very good. One of the things we struggle with, and I've been in several IUCN sessions and such on conservation impact, is when you do conservation effectively and nothing changes. And by that, I mean that it could be a success, that nothing changes. Why? Because the species could be in free fall, for instance, and your conservation intervention is keeping it stable, but it's not necessarily recovering it. How do we communicate conservation impact that is preventing things from getting worse as opposed to folks just expecting recovery.
You're going to leave the hard part, I'm guessing, Sean.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
So there was actually a really, I don't know the name of it, someone probably does, a significant IUCN publication 3 to 4 years ago that looked at this exact counterintuitive and said, where would we be if we weren't doing all our work? And I think it demonstrates that our movement is doing an incredible amount of good. Sometimes the trend data looks bad, but there's no question if we weren't all out there every day doing the amazing work we do across 1,000 different species and 1,000 different platforms, the world would be a very different place. And so I think knowing that it's making a difference is critical. If someone can find that IUCN publication, put in the chat, I think it was a really good one on exactly this theme. I think it might have been in Nature or something. I want to pick up on something that Celina said and Sean referred to. I believe this is an incredibly charismatic species. We just have proof that it's a charismatic species. Crawl up on Celina's desk. And if I had to simplify how you drive a behavior change campaign in the most simple way, it's how do you make the invisible visible and get people talking about it so it leads to micro actions across a number of players. And so I think that the idea for me with small cats is there are many successes, but they're in isolated pockets. I love that there's a Panthera out there and a small cat conference that can start to add up all of these wins and add up all of these species into more of a movement level discussion. I was very lucky to spend 4 or 5 months in Saudi Arabia in Alula, working alongside a Panthera team looking at the Arabian leopard. And I know the leopard is a little bit of an outlier in terms of its charismatic attention, but just seeing the effectiveness of that species acting as a charismatic icon for an entire landscape, for entire habitats, made me believe that there is huge potential in what I believe is, in fact, one of the most charismatic species, not one of the least charismatic species out there.
If I may add to that as well, that's a really great point, Sean. And what I love what you said is how do we show, like, how do we reveal what is unseen? And that's something that Sean mentioned as well. But, small cats probably don't get as much attention because people don't really know what they exist, and people don't know what they look like, and because it's so hard to study them and how it's so hard to see them. But there's also the urgency element, like people don't realize how urgent the situation is. But exactly, like, how do we communicate, how much worse things would be if conservationists weren't active, is to show people, we're very visual. We're visual creatures. And so being able to, and this is like the art of really good science communication and data visualization, and something that scientists will really appreciate. Like one of The Economist's most popular sections is its data journalism. People like, obviously different audiences, but people want to see progress or, and I think we have to make that really evident for people. And another point, Sean, you mentioned the leopard. I have a leopard behind me for a reason. It may be a relative outlier as an animal in terms of charisma, but I guarantee you in the fashion world, the leopard is the most iconic and popular animal ever throughout history. And that's something that, that's something that we're working on. So it's also how do conservationists speak to totally different audiences in their language? People who go to Fashion Week might not necessarily know about the leopard, but they definitely know about, 1950s Dior leopard print. So it's how do we balance that? And then another point, I really loved the question that you brought up, Mauro, of basically like burnout and fatigue amongst conservationists themselves. And that is so, so, so important to bring up. And the kind of antidote to despair is alliance. And conservationists may not necessarily, conservationists, we do our thing and we do it really, really well. But if there's a lithium mine, that's a job for an activist. And I'm sure there are activists who want to fight that. And so, for example, the project that I worked on last year was, we were, talking to conservationists about tortoise conservation on Aldabra, and they mentioned, by the way, there's going to be this massive hotel development. So we're going to, how are we supposed to manage the biodiversity and the populations in spite of this massive shock to the system? It's like, well, we got to stop the development. And maybe a glimmer of hope for you is also, it's our job to communicate those wins. What are the oil pipelines that have been stopped? And last year, there were nickel mines in Raja Ampat, and those 4 out of 5 of those nickel mines had their licenses revoked due to activism. And that's not putting more work onto conservationists, but that is conservationists finding alliances with others like activists or campaigners who can, tackle the same problem from a very different angle.
Interesting, very interesting, Celina. And I wonder, and I live in Western Canada in a city where 70% of our economy is oil and gas, and I wonder how do we celebrate best practice when it's done sustainably? So when in these different sectors, for instance, companies are engaging in ways that are, environmentally responsible, that are doing the right thing, how do we highlight that to set a standard that helps small cats and other ecosystems beyond? That's a tough one, is it? I don't know. But
start.
Sorry, John?
I was inviting the other Sean.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that should be highlighted. I mean, if there's some sort of partnership or there's been some sort of collaboration between, small cat conservationists and, industries that may otherwise be known for causing harm, that is definitely worthy of highlighting as an example that can be followed by others and showcasing what kind of practices have been put into place in order to support small cat conservation. That is, yeah, I feel agree that should be something to be highlighted.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of the IPBES reports, and the latest IPBES report was on business and biodiversity. And it just points out at its core that if we really want to fix these problems, we have to break down this paradigm of us and them, and we have to look at mergers and alliances. And so I am a big fan of stopping demonizing certain groups and bringing them into the tent. I will just pick up one other point. I mean, if I need a translocation project, I don't sit there and go, how do I learn about translocation? I look to my friend Axel, who's the leader in the world, and I call him and said, how do I do this? And I think sometimes when it comes to communications, behavior change, we sort of think we have to do it in-house and that it's not a professional service you can partner with. There are an increasing number of groups who specialize in this space and can mentor you through doing it well and quickly and cost-effective and targeted. So my first advice would be to reach out and find allies who do and stay in this type of work, but in the lexicon of environment. Don't go to a health communication, someone who understands the particular challenges and opportunities that our particular field offers. And I think there's an increasing number of groups out there who are good at this.
Amazing. Well, we're going to have to wrap up here. We could go all day, I'm sure, but especially as communicators, just want to invite each of you to just give one last succinct message to everybody out there. I'll leave it wide open. Celina, you get to go first.
Ooh. Echoing what we've just said, communications is part of conservation, and there are people like ourselves here who specialize in using it and wielding it, and reach out, ask questions. We're here to help, and find community in that.
Okay. John Mowbray?
Yeah, go back to your first question, Axel, in terms of, conservation has been struggling for time to do these sort of communications. As I say, reach out to journalists for one, for sure, because that's something it doesn't have to be in the form of a fully fledged press release or anything, but keep journalists informed about any successes, challenges, studies that you're working on for small cats to really try and help amplify that message.
For me, to closing, love is an incredibly important framer. So love-based messaging, not negation-based messaging, is what makes long-term behavior change. So how do we get people not to be angry at threats to cats, but in fact love cats more is critical. And picking up on this movement piece, we know behavior change happens when people get access to messages from 6 or 7 different sources that reinforce and are aligned. If one of those messages is misaligned, it can throw people's trust off of the whole ecosystem. But if all 8 messages come from Panthera, that's deemed to be one message, not 8. So it really means we need to look at these alliances where we have Sean M doing this in the journalistic format. We have Celina creating songs, music, soap operas, whatever. We have Panthera doing the science. All of these add up to the ecosystem of noise that can actually make a difference. So it really not just is ideal with partners, it requires partners to break through the noise that Celina mentioned, which is out there everywhere now.
Thank you so much. I mean, you've might have seen hearts flying around the screen and everything like that of people loving what you're saying. With that, we will be just wrapping up our panel. We do have one more word to come. I believe that Fred Launay has been able to join us, our CEO. From Panthera. I know our team is just engaging him, but they're just Angus from our African Massive team is just helping him out to engage further. Right. So I'm just watching here. So slowly some of the dialogue, but I think one thing that I've learned is that. One of the things that I say all the time, which I'm sure is the most compelling educational message ever, is that over 2/3 of endangered or threatened wildcat species are small. And in fact, small cats make up over 80%. But maybe that's not emotional. Maybe that's not the right statement for the right audience. I think you're starting to teach me. Okay, just one second. There might be one more question in the Q&A. Okay, actually, if you don't mind just hanging on, we do have another question from Victoria. Victoria, please go ahead in asking your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for the panel. It's really nice to see the hope and all this expertise addressing these problems. But I would like to wonder, how can we balance raising awareness for these small wildcats with the risk of fueling pet demand and illegal trafficking? Like, how can we promote conservation for species like desert cats that has cute 50 centimeters, telling that I can thrift and I can have this as a house cat, while countering the status prejudice of wanting big cats like tigers or leopards? Like, they already have tigers and leopards at a home. And how can we save the small ones and marketing for them without chasing that problem even more? Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I can jump in on that if you like. Yeah, so this is that's a really complex problem. So we see this ongoing right now with AI generated videos. So this is a real challenge, and I would really stress that the potential risks that are attached to the AI generated videos that conservationists are facing at the moment. They're really driving interest and wildlife demand. So one thing is ensuring that the messaging, the images, the videos that are being used are real images. I would say, and stressing that these are cats that are in their natural environment, and including messaging to that degree alongside any sort of marketing. Because the challenge of using the AI generated videos is that they can become increasingly realistic, and it can fuel this demand for the small cat pet trade that you're mentioning there. So I think it's really just focusing on using what is available, showing cats in their natural environment and not in another setting.
I mean, from my perspective, just picking up what Sean said, one of the biggest challenges I've had in my organization, the Canadian Wildlife Federation, was when we agreed we would no longer do AI generated videos or pictures in any context of wildlife that exists in the wild. And it was really hard for some of our team to get their head around that. Some of the fundraising team, some of the communication team, but of course that's what we do. And so grounding in that real wildlife as a species-based, wildlife-based NGO was really important. I'm going to come back, though, to this idea of a choir and that we all need to be on the same wavelength. Meta-level messaging is really important. If the multiple different players working on small cats sort of know the high-level script and stick to it, these are beautiful, but they're endangered. We have solutions, but they take attention and money. And for me, a really big one is love them and leave them alone. For certain species, loving them means leaving them alone. And that's that wild cat piece. I think it gets confusing on the messaging because many of us love our house cats. And these sort of look close to the house cat. So doing that fine line, hard distinction between a wild cat and a house cat is for me critical in this. And then having the messages reinforced again and again consistently across the movement.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more, actually, and also to add on to that, the imagery and visuals of wild cats being wild. I'm sure if we can get footage of small cats being vicious and aggressive, that's great. And I think having this high-level script that everyone aligns to, and visuals, again, a small wild cat should never be in the same frame as a human being. Just cannot happen. And I know, and I'm sure lots of people here have seen quite counterproductive awareness campaigns of people holding small cats. And so everyone's sticking to one high-level script and having visual guidelines across the choir will help with that.
Amazing. Yeah, and the earlier comments around AI, I remember being in a meeting, I think it might have been Belize, actually I think it was in Brazil. No, sorry, but it was in Costa Rica last year. There was a presentation given by scientists of small cats, and everyone looked at this, and they were like, "Is that actually the cat?" And it took 20 minutes or so of people looking exactly, and it turned out it was an AI generated aspect. It just amazing, to see that kind of potential communication threat, if you will. Right. Okay. Well, I think we're going to be wrapping it up here, and then our team's just trying to connect with Fred Launay. But for now, I just want to say a huge thank you, and also I'm not trying to get all of you inundated, but there might be additional questions that are coming. So go to Roy as well from Cat Specialist Group has been very helpful in putting different links to the different publications we referred to in the chat. Thank you for that. And otherwise, let's just share the joy. I mean, share the joy and the inspiration. Let's be real and let's not, gloss over the challenges. But the journey is worth the battle, and I think we shouldn't be shy about sharing both the challenges to have people rally and show that recovery is possible, that the work you do makes a huge difference around the world. So thank you very much, Sean, and Celina. It's been a real privilege. Now we'll just hang on here for a second and see if we can get Fred on the line. So just a couple of minute break here. But please do stay on. Fred, our CEO of Panthera, would have some final words. Otherwise, we'll get him roped into the next couple of days. All right, you're released, illustrious panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Axel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, by the way, just as we're waiting for your comments and reflections. And it's really encouraging to us. It's been a couple of months of planning, and it's so, nice and heartfelt of you to see your congratulations. We have 3 more days coming up. And one of the things that I wanted to say just really quickly as well is please note that the starting time actually changes by day. So pay close attention to your program. And the reason for that is because we were determined not to have anybody do their presentations in the middle of the night. And we've been, in the spirit of inclusivity, we've been trying to incorporate across all time zones, cross geography, cross genders, embracing our full diversity of age as well. And so, that is the spirit. So tomorrow, I believe we are starting an hour later, but please double check the program, and then it'll fluctuate a little bit from day to day. I think with Fred, he's been trying to join and having some technical difficulties. Our team's been trying to help, but I think we're going to see if we can get him again in the next couple of days. So for now, thank you all for your tremendous attention, for your contribution, and everything like that. I think we will work out another plan to have Fred with us. But it's been a tremendous day. Congratulations to all the presenters. Thank you for all the good questions. And we will see you again tomorrow, just as we will for the subsequent couple of days. Remember, you are all a community. You are the ones that are out there saving small cats. Unite, join, connect to see how to support each other and how to make a difference for the small cats that have no voice, but are waiting for you to make a difference. Thank you so much.